dared to treat him like that? Who the heck threw that on me? How dare you? After Sergio wiped his face clean of the drink that was thrown on him, he was greeted with the sight of Dawn, the woman he was ogling. Furious, Dawn yelled back at him with her hands on her waist. Useless piece of crap, say what? Have you eaten peep just now? Why are your words so foul? Are you a mad dog? Why are you still biting on someone that clearly doesn't want to have anything to do with you? Don't you dare say you're a mouse. You're more like something that came out of a certain somewhere, you stubborn, smelly thing. Even with one hand, Jian could beat you up so bad you'd kneel down and call him daddy. Who are you calling disabled? You're the one with the brain full of worms. Jian, Sean, and the rest had their jaws dropped as they witnessed Dawn, with her hands firmly on her waist, explode with fury. They could not help but burst out in laughter, especially when she roared, "He could beat you up so bad you'd kneel and call him daddy." Tom stared with bulging eyes as the entire scene unfolded, while Jean, who would banter with Dawn usually, was only slightly surprised in the beginning, then tried to hold in his laughter as he watched her perform. He had already known that Dawn was good with her words and was furiously prickly. However, she was usually suppressed because of Jian. What happened today? Why did she explode today? Jian was stunned since he expected nothing. When Sergio was squabbling, he really wanted to turn back and punch him until he shuts up. Just when he was about to do so, the little woman in his arms was suddenly filled with an unknown strength as she wiggled out of his arms, clenched her hands on her waist, and started yelling at Sergio. "If you're gonna keep pestering us with that foul mouth of yours, the next thing I'm gonna throw at you will no longer be alcohol." Dawn glared angrily at Sergio. Chapter 27. No one is allowed to bully you. No one. Dawn did not want trouble, but when she felt Jian trying hard to suppress his anger, she thought that his mother had him promise to not go against the other Moses, or Jian himself did not want to make things ugly with them. However, Sergio continually pestered them and called them names. When she was younger, after running away from Shaban needs beatings, her big brother taught her that in the future, no matter who it was, she was not allowed to let them bully her. She can be at a disadvantage, but she was not allowed to just accept the insults as it is. We can be good friends when all is well, but when you point your finger at me and scold me nastily, no can do. His arm was injured because of her, so when others yelled at him, she felt really agitated in her heart. When Sergio came back to his senses, not only was he not angry, he was also shameless as he sauntered towards Dawn with a lewd sneer. "Yo, what a feisty one. I love chicks like you. Tapping you would feel so good, ah." Almost immediately after Sergio said the word good, a shadow darted towards him from beside Dawn, and a punch landed squarely in between his eyes. Sergio yelped in pain right away as he tumbled over. Then, Jian grabbed a bottle of wine from a table nearby and smashed it cruelly over Sergio's head with an explosive boom. After that, Jian grabbed the collar of Sergio's shirt and yanked him up as he stared at him with wildly ferocious, bloodlust-filled eyes. "If you don't want it effing live, just let me know. I can send you to be on your way. How dare you piss on my woman?" Jian's actions were quick and swift, ferocious yet ruthless. Dawn was shocked. Jian was so vicious Sergio's head was bloody, disfigured, and was no longer conscious. When Dawn snapped back to reality, she ran over immediately and tried with all her might to pull away Jian's hand, who was tightly clutching Sergio's clothes. When Jian saw Dawn, the bloodlust in his eyes started to subside as he pulled her quickly into his arms, his voice so cold it sounded like it rang all the way from the pits of hell. "No one is allowed to bully you. No one is allowed to defile you. No one is allowed, no one." It felt like he was hugging her with all his might. Dawn thought her waist was going to snap in half. At that moment, Dawn did not display any signs of discomfort. All she did was hold him tight, her little hands patting Jian on his back as she said, "No one was gonna bully me. Jian, calm down. You're scaring me. Your arm is still injured." She was calming him little by little, pulling him back from the curdling, blood-filled pits of hell to reality. The redness in Jian's eyes began to subside and was finally calm. It was then that he realized that he was hugging her too tightly, so he released her immediately and caressed her cheek. He murmured, "Dawny baby, let's go home." Okay. Dawn was absolutely compliant as she responded to him. Jian took her hand and turned to Sean. "I don't want to hear any news or gossip about what happened today." "Yes, sir." Sean was quick to affirm. After watching Jian and Dawn disappear from their line of sight outside the bar, Tom and the rest let out a sigh of relief. Jian scared them all just now. It had been a while since they saw him take matters into his own hands. "Has Sir lost his mind? He scared me terribly when he rushed over like that." Tom was dumbfounded as he stared in the direction where Jian had left and sighed. "Thank the heavens I didn't say much about asking him to leave Dawn. Or else." Tom looked at Sergio, who was barely breathing on the ground, and shuddered. That was so scary. The thought of helping Sergio medically did not cross his mind when he yanked Jean and turned back to the suite. "Come on, drink a few drinks with me so I can calm down." At Regal, Jian was pushed down onto the bed by Dawn the moment they got home. Dawn took antiseptic and carefully cleaned the wound that had started bleeding once more. Her actions were gentle as she occasionally lowered her head to blow softly on Jian's wound. Her eyes were filled with worry and anxiety as she stared at the wound and frowned as if she was the one who was hurt. "Sorry, I scared you just now." Out of a sudden, Jian held onto her hand that was treating his wound. His eyes were filled with sorrow. "I can't bear to see anyone have the slightest bit of disrespect for you. You're the apple of my eye. If I wouldn't do it, who would? I know you're like this because you care for me." Dawn looked him in the eyes and solemnly apologized. "It's all my fault. If I followed you guys back to the suite and did not yell at him, he wouldn't have spewed all those nonsense, and you wouldn't have acted on it. But he insulted you. He called you out and insulted you. I don't like it. My silly Billy, how is this your fault? He's the one that's looking to die." When Jian saw from afar how Sergio was staring lewdly at Dawn as he sauntered towards their direction, and after Jian had recognized Jason, the man that Sean found out that had perverted thoughts about Dawn, who was following behind Sergio, even if Dawn did not yell back at them, they would also inevitably be beaten up, albeit it being a little later. He was thinking of at least first sending Dawn away, and he would not do it himself. He knew Dawn was a little afraid of him, so he did not want to do anything rash in front of her. However, Sergio had a death wish. Dawn saw the flash of menace when Jian spoke. The corner of her mouth twitched as she tried to smoothen out the crinkles at the edge of his eyes as if she was wiping the bloodlust and malice away gently. "Jian, could you promise me one thing?" "Name it." "One thing?" "I would even promise you one thing every single day, every single minute." Dawn wrapped her arms around his neck. "No one can exit a battlefield unscathed. Even the god of war would get injured sometimes. However, I don't want you to even have the risk of getting hurt. I'm terrified of the thought of you hurt." The arms around his neck tightened anxiously. She continued with an extreme hesitance. "Can you just do it for me? You said you want to take care of me forever, right? If you're injured, how would you protect me? Please don't be so brash from now on, okay? Of course, if our lives are threatened, we shouldn't sit and wait to die. Sigh, how should I say it? If we can solve it with words, let's not involve our hands, just like today. You didn't have to use your hands, do you understand?" Dawn nearly confused herself as she spoke. She did not want him to resort to violence, but she did not want him to not fight back when he was being bullied. She was worried that he would get hurt. Jian looked at the little woman before him that had confused herself with their speech as she looked at him worriedly, and felt like the woman that he had chosen was daft and adorable. "I understand." Jian looked at how silly she was and leaned in unexpectedly, his face filled with ambiguous shadiness. "Just like right now, if I can solve it with words, I should." The sudden kiss caught Dawn off guard. A pair of huge hands snaked around her waist. Worried about his arm, Dawn subconsciously took some steps back as she tried to push him back. However, Jian intensified as he stood up and took a step forward toward her, following her footsteps. Dawn, who could not back away from his aggressive pursuit, lifted up her head to endure his demand as she was forced to take steps back, till her back was backed up against the hard bathroom door. Chapter 28, No Composure at All. Jian. Jian refused to give Dawn a chance to say no. All he allowed was for her to take a breath before sealing her ruby-red lips shut once more, and he took her hands and interlocked them above her head, so the next steps he was about to take could be done so swiftly. Dawn was often flustered around him, as if he knew all her soft spots and sensitive parts of her body, causing ripples and waves to appear in her otherwise peaceful, calm waters. Any further than this and she would pass out. Want a shower together? Jian smirked naughtily at the woman who had melted into a puddle in his arms. Her lips were delectable and gleaming. He looked at her sly yet victoriously. When it finally dawned on Dawn, she realized that Jian had carried her into the bathroom and seated her on the basin with her clothes unbuttoned, threatening to fall, and his voice made her explode with shyness. No. Dawn pushed him away in a panic as she fled down from the tub and out the washroom. Slam. Dawn quickly slammed the door shut, then she stood lethargically by the door, unable to come to her senses for a long while. This man was really scary. He must have drugged her. Why did it feel like she had lost her memory? Sob. Dawn covered her face tightly, upset and shy. She had no composure at all. As a result of that, Dawn could not look Jian in the eyes the entire night, as if when she did, she would get pregnant. It was like he knew the world's deadliest moves, and it could lure you silently until you were tangled deep within his webs. Fortunately, after Dawn was done with wash-up, Tom and the rest were back, and Tom mentioned that he wanted to give him a rabies shot, and they stayed in the study to have a little chat. By the time Jian came back, Dawn had already fallen asleep. After school had officially started, Dawn missed out on time to spend with her classmates because she was absent from military training. During this time, Sheena had become the class favorite. However, Dawn did not waste any time when she took a break, since she knew that a week after school began, there would be an aptitude test. This test was important to Dawn. Even though she may not have gone through official classes and had enrolled in school on time, she was under the tutelage of second brother, and she had not neglected any of her studies. Also, she would read books from Jian's study when she was on break from military training. Dawn had just found her seat, and as she was preparing to sit down, an arm stretched out before her out of the blue to forbid her from doing so. Dawn lifted up her head to find that the arm belonged to Sheena. I never expected the teacher to give you such a front seat. Well, since you're not here to actually study but only to have something to fill up your resume with, give up your seat for someone in need then. Sheena folded her arms while she looked at Dawn in disdain. Dawn merely glanced faintly at Sheena. What a pestering nuisance. Seats were arranged by the teacher. If you have something to say about it, go talk to the teacher. Dawn pushed Sheena away, her face was stoic as she said coldly. Move out the way, Beach. You. What did you say? Sheena was furious as she jabbed her finger at Dawn, humiliated. People were starting to reprimand Dawn for insulting Sheena, but she did not care, nor did she want to cause trouble. She placed her bag at her seat right away and sat down, completely unfazed with everything that was going on as she casually took out her books and placed them on the table. However, Sheena was not having it. Since she was young, she refused to see Dawn accept normal, proper education. She could hardly sleep or eat now that Dawn had managed to worm her way into school. She had to do all she could so Dawn could no longer stay in school. She wanted Dawn's name to be completely tarnished. I'm talking to you, can't you hear me? Ha, what an attitude for someone with a sugar daddy to have. Someone who could opt out of military training just like that, and out of the blue have the teacher arrange such a front seat for that certain someone. How unjust. After she haughtily peeked at the female student beside her, Sheena sneered. Not like Jane Smith over here, who had managed to enter this school with her own efforts. She was even a little nearsighted, but the teacher had her sit close to the wall and have you seated here. How unfair. Isn't it, everyone? Sheena had managed to get the crowd to warm up as an opening act before her big show. As soon as she was done, people around her started to feel righteous anger for Jane Smith, and they collectively felt that Dawn bullied her classmates just because she had authority behind her. Not only was she not serious about learning, but she was also selfishly taking up all the good spots, and some, who felt like she was just here for the certification, started to taunt her mercilessly. If you still have some good conscience in you, give up your seat. Sheena started fanning the flames. I think you'd like the seat by the wall since it'll be convenient for you to sleep in class, isn't it? You won't be able to understand what's being taught anyway, haha. As she was talking, Sheena shot a look at the girl beside her, and the girl immediately got up and tried to yank Dawn up, partnering with Sheena as they added oil to the flames. Come on, you, just give up your seat for Jane Smith out of the sudden discovery of goodness in your heart, okay? She doesn't have a sugar daddy, and she's just a child that loves to study. She has no interest in dirty ladder climbing schemes, so she's certainly no match for you. Dawn gave her a look of disgust as she shook her hands away forcefully, stood up, and folded her hands in front of her as she nonchalantly scanned through the entire class. What a joke! Dawn sneered indignantly. Frankly, I'm puzzled. Why so hostile and unwelcoming towards me? What conflict do we have between us? None, I'm sure. Up till now, I've not even spent one day with any one of you, and you're blinded by the nonsense some flamethrower throws at you. Whether I'm a sugar baby or a mistress, how does that concern you? All you young people acting like gossiping, nosy relatives as you assume everything out of what you've heard of me. Here I thought, for all of you to be able to qualify enrollment in this school, you would have some degree of intelligence and independent critical thinking skills. How are you so easily trusting of what people tell you? Are your eyes just there for decoration? If your parents were to be as gullible as you in their workplaces or in the business field, your families would have all died ages ago. As Dawn spoke, she took a step towards Sheena and said, Also, you. Stop the nonsense. I wasn't here for military training, and before I could even put down my bag when I stepped into class this morning, you've already started finding trouble with me. How is this not an abuse of non-existent power entrusted to you? My seat may be in front, but it wasn't the best seat. If I'm not mistaken, your seat's the best one amongst the entire class. Jane Smith came in as the first amongst the entire form, so shouldn't that golden seat belong to her? Why would you feign care and pretend to be righteously mad as you question my seat? Do you have any hidden agendas, Dawn's scoffing retort was like she was reminding her fellow classmates of something else. Sheena, I'm gonna say this to you for the last time. Stop appearing in front of me and disturb me with your disgustingness. I don't want to look for trouble, but I'm not afraid of you. If there's a next time, brains or brawl, choose one. We'll go up against each other so you can finally shut your trap. Sheena was frightened by Dawn's last facial expression, and she backed up in fright. Why are all of you gathering around over there? A teacher appeared in class and broke the chaotic commotion in class. Everyone dispersed. Teacher, someone is unhappy with the seat arrangement and said that it should be arranged according to the results of the level gauging test. Sheena's sneer returned once again. Dawn, you illiterate. Let's see how you get past this now. Chapter 29. She could not believe it, and she did not want to. This is a great idea, so let's just set it like that. Also, are you all done with your military training reflection? Class rep, please collect all of them. The teacher was about to turn and leave the class when they remembered something as they were approaching the door, stopped, and came back. Which of you is Dawn? Please collect your pre-military training checkup report at the nurse's office. Okay, teacher. Dawn got up quickly and went out of class. She was probably the only one left. She was immediately put on leave by Jian right after the checking up, so she could not take the report back on time. When Dawn entered the nurse's office, there was someone there for an emergency. A nurse asked for her to wait at the side for a while. Gastritis. You've got to take care of your food intake and stop staying up so late. I'll give you a slip, go get your medication at the pharmacy. A beautiful doctor reminded the patient as she walked out of the clinic. Joycey. After taking a good look at the doctor's face, Dawn was stunned. It was Joy Jenkins, one of her friends during her younger days. That time, the four of them were inseparable, and they were very close. Dawn, as the youngest, was the most pampered one amongst them. It was clear that Dawn's arrival was within Joy's expectations since she was elated but calm as she cocked her eyebrows at Dawn, signaling that she still had patients around and asked for her to be patient. Dawn waited quietly for Joy to prescribe the medication, and she was immediately whisked into Joyce's office right after that. It's really you. When I saw the name, I could not believe it, until I saw the very rare blood type. Joy hugged Dawn emotionally, and scanned her up and down like a big sister, checking every inch of her before letting out a sigh. You're all grown up. Where have you been all these while? Initially, checkup reports could just be handed over to the teacher to pass to Dawn. But when Joy saw the name and the blood type, she was overwhelmed with emotions, hence asking Dawn to collect the report at the nurse's office personally. You're the same as well. Dawn gently patted Joy. Where did you go? All Big Brother did was confess his feelings for you. How could you just run away? We could not even find you. Now that you're in my school, does it mean we get to meet each other more often? I don't work at your school. I'm just invited here to take over for 2 days on an exchange program. I was supposed to fly off this morning, but I've changed my flight plans for you. I still have an operation I have to do tonight. Joy looked helpless as she pouted. Her lower back was sore from the clinic visits from a few patients just now, so she sat down in her chair and dug for Dawn's medical records. Dawn knew that her Joycey was a girl like the wind, who loved her taste of freedom, and she would not remain in place for long. How are you and Big Brother now? Dawn asked concernedly. We haven't had the time to reconnect yet. Okay, let's not talk about this. Joy did not want to talk about this, so she abruptly changed the topic. How did you get to come to school here? How are you now? Anything interesting that happened? Come, give your sister some stories. Joy teased casually as she flipped through Dawn's medical report. State College was a world-renowned college that required its students to do a thorough body checkup when they enrolled, and from the looks of the report, it was a thorough and meticulous check. Me? So many weird things had happened. Dawn sighed. I'm married. Ah. What? You had eloped or something? Joy peeled her eyes off Dawn's report to look at her astonishedly. She could not believe it. However, when she looked back at her report, her gaze sank. She flipped through Dawn's report quickly to the last few pages and looked through the entire document once more. What is it? Am I sick? Dawn teased when she saw Joy's reaction. No, who told you that? You're healthy. Joy was clearly brushing Dawn off when she said these words. She lifted up her wrist to look at the time, stole a few glances at Dawn, and when she turned around, she caught Dawn staring at her. Dawn caught her stealing peeks. Joy chuckled awkwardly. Joycey, what kind of face are you making? If there's something wrong with me, you've got to tell me. Dawn looked at Joy's unnatural facial expression. The earlier I know, the earlier I can seek treatment for it, right? Nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Our little Dawnie is in perfect health. Joy tried so hard to cover up. She asked in feigned casualness. How long have you been married? Is he kind to you? Did you talk about having children? He's really good to me. We've been married for nearly 6 months now. Dawn answered in all seriousness. We've not talked about children for now, but to bear children is a crucial yet inevitable experience in life, isn't it? Maybe he thought that I'm still at a young age, so he did not bring it up. A crucial yet inevitable experience. This was something that she looks forward to. Joy looked at her and suddenly, a reminder rang on Joy's phone, reminding her about her flight plans. She switched off her phone in frustration. After looking at Dawn's report, Joy found out that there were many signs that indicated that she might not be able to have children. Besides, people with rare blood types possessed an extremely high risk if they were to bear children, but if she had to keep this information to herself, she really could not do so. If the patient knew about their condition, they could still stand a chance if they were to go through reconditioning of their bodies. If they were kept ignorant, they could miss the prime time to change themselves, hence losing the chance, and would regret it for the rest of their lives. Little Donnie, do you believe in technology? Do you believe in the current medicinal technology and its fast-paced future? After loads of hem and hawing in the beginning, Joy had finally mustered enough courage and confidence before she told Dawn the truth. Dawn could not handle what she was told. She backed up a few steps in disbelief and slumped onto the floor uncontrollably. She felt like she got struck by lightning right on her heart. She could not say a word, she could only shake her head anxiously as she did not want to believe what she had heard. Her face was ashen, her fingers balled into a fist and released quickly from emotional tension. This went on for a few more times as her eyes darted around floatingly. That sense of hopelessness, helplessness, and panic felt like it had zapped half of her soul away. Dawn felt like her whole world was crumbling, and it was taking hold of her pulse, zapping her life force from her as a few keywords echoed repeatedly inside her head. You won't be able to have children right now. It'll be difficult for you to conceive. How could she not have children? Why did the heavens have to punish her like that? She had someone to love wholeheartedly, to be with him the rest of her life, to raise a family with him, and to be with him as they enjoy the ups and downs of building a family. Now, because of her, he would not have offspring. Because of her, he would be robbed of the right to be a father, and to be robbed of all his hopes and dreams. How painful would life be? Why? Why did it have to be like this? Dawn forgot how she got back to her classroom, she forgot how she went on with her day. When school had ended, Jian came to pick her up on time. Dawn could not look at him in the eyes. She was afraid that the pair of charming, dazzling eyes would lose their sparkle in the near future because of her. She refused to believe it. She was still so young, how could she have such a problem? At night, Jian went to shower as usual, but Dawn was conflicted and in dilemma. There were a few times where she would appear at the bathroom door, wanting to knock and enter, so that she could be with him and give it a try and see if it was true that she could not conceive, but the shame in her heart defeated all the dreams in her heart. She was shy, bashful, and she did not know where to start. Chapter 30, Her Unusualness. Why are you standing here? Jian opened the bathroom door and saw Dawn standing right by the door. Jian was towel drying his hair. The water droplets dripped onto the tip of Dawn's nose, slid down the corner of her mouth, and dribbled all the way down. The numbing, tingling feeling flitted across the skin of her chest, making Dawn blush and her ears red hot. Jian saw her suddenly flushed face and felt tickled. He teased her as he leaned in her ears and whispered sensually, "You sneaking peeks on me, madam?" When Dawn heard what Jian said, her flushed face grew redder, but her heart sank. Whatever happens now, I'll just give it my all, just this time. Dawn closed her eyes and with a do-or-die attitude, stood on her tippy toes, grabbed his shirt so Jian lowered his head, and kissed him. This was not the first time Dawn had kissed him. Her previous kisses were feathery light, nonchalant touches of the lips, but this time, her kiss overflowed with meaningful emotions, and was even laced with a tinge of seduction. This was not her. Jian immediately stopped what she was doing and placed his hands on her shoulders, putting some distance between them as he looked into her eyes and questioned, "What happened today? Is this all you've learned?" This woman, was this all Du had learned in her first day of school? Was she molested by some pervert? What kind of nonsense school was this? It had only been one day, and his little bunny was corrupted. He should send Sean over to investigate. He was the only one that was allowed to slowly educate his woman in areas like this. I. Dawn was so nervous she did not know what to do. She did not dare look him in the eyes, afraid that her thoughts would be read like an open book immediately, so she just rushed into Jian's arms recklessly, buried herself at the depths of his heart, and murmured pitifully, "I saw a lot of couples do the same today. So, as I saw them, I missed you so much, so I wanted to." Mm. Before Dawn could finish her sentence, Jian kissed her right away. How could his woman only stare at someone else getting hugs and kisses enviously? Besides, nowadays, when he walked on roads and saw someone else in an intimate embrace, he would miss her so much. He knew clearly what the yearning felt like. As soon as she asked, he would give her everything. This time, Dawn reciprocated the kiss with all her heart, without an ounce of reluctance or bashfulness. She was even anticipating his further action as her arms clung onto Jian's neck. All Jian needed was to gently lift her up, and her legs would be tightly clutched around his waist. He carried her to the bed and laid on top of her as the two of them sunk into the soft, fluffy bed. Every time he rained on her, it would make her tingle all over. As usual, Jian stopped right before her remaining resolve crumbled. He was about to get up when she pulled him down once more. "No, don't leave. I. Dawn was so shy she was stuttering. Jian was also painfully suppressing his urges as he teetered on the edge of the cliff and could explode at any given time. Normally, this was the time where he would walk away, and Dawn would look like a huge weight has lifted off her as she pushed him away at the same time when he would leave. And that was how he could hold on to his last ounce of self-restraint to suppress his urges. However, today, she was still holding on to him tightly, refusing to let him go. "Baby, you're gonna be in danger if you keep this up." Jian's eyes were gleaming red. He was like an arrow ready to be released off the bow and could not take in not even a tad bit of her flame fanning. He looked at the increasing amount of red and his voice hoarsely husky. At that moment, Dawn hated him. She had already taken so much initiative, and he was still holding back. Did he really want her to spell it out for him? She thought he knew her really well based on their usual interactions, so how was he so clueless now? "Jian, you're doing this on purpose." Dawn closed her eyes and spat out. "You've made me like this every single time, and you leave me immediately right after. I have my own needs as well, don't you know?" Dawn felt like her entire being was burning up in shame after she had said it. Jian looked at the nervousness and displeasure in her eyes and thought that she was really upset, so he explained hastily. "I don't want to force myself on you. I want to wait for you to be completely willing." No, you're not forcing me." Dawn really wanted to end this awkward conversation, so she replied hastily. If you cannot, it's okay then." What Dawn meant was, if he felt like now was not the right time, then she would let it go. However, when she was nervous, she had spoken the forbidden word to all males. "I cannot." Jian spat out these words through gritted teeth. Didn't this woman know how merciless these two words were to a man? All this while he had to resist her charm with all his might so that she did not feel like she was being forced, but his woman now thought that he could not. It was almost like after he said the two words, he longer showed Dawn any mercy and gave any chance for her to escape. He was demanding with no room for leeway. In Dawn's panicked state, they had finally gone all the way. The last time, he felt compassion for her, so all his touches were as soft and tender as he could. Besides that, it was different from when he had his first time and what that is now. It was like, you have tried the most amazing thing in the world, and she would tempt you every day, but you had to resist it. The feeling of having the most amazing thing in front of you but you could not enjoy, and after a few months, you could finally have a taste again. It was the craziest temptation yet. She called his name, again and again. Her eyes were moist with emotions. However, all Jian did was smirk, and continue what he was doing, no mercy shown. Dawn's last memory was her being held up at the basin in the washroom. A ray of sun broke through the misty night. The sleeping beauty was calm and serene, and that made him feel like he could go in for another round, and it would be as magical. Jian looked down at the sleeping girl that was in her arms, and her scrunched face, perhaps it was a tinge of grievance from when she asked for mercy, but no mercy was shown. He chuckled lovingly and murmured to himself as he caressed her face. "Sorry, hubby will be more gentle next time." He did not know if she heard him, but she did mumble something in reply, and slept through the night. The few days after that, Dawn would jokingly pester Jian, and since he was by then living in the land of milk and honey, he did not think more into that. His woman being completely and utterly smitten by him was the best drug in the world. Dawn researched on the internet, and it showed her that in 10 days, she would be able to start testing for pregnancy. That morning, Sean sent her to school as usual, but she took leave and left school. She made her way to the most prestigious hospital in Metropolis and made an appointment with the OB or GYN. There were a lot of people there, so she had to line up for consultation, check-ups, and when she needed to come back for a return visit to the doctors. Throughout the entire process, Dawn was anxious, excited yet terrified at the same time. This was the only desire of her heart. It had been so many days, and every day she would be with him. If she did not. Patient B079, please make way to consultation room 3. Chapter 31. To do that every day was not something glamorous. After hearing the announcement calling out her number, Dawn's heart quivered as she made a beeline to the consultation room with the checklist in her hand. Dawn handed the form over obediently to the doctor, which he had received in a stoic expression. He skimmed through each page robotically and turned to Dawn in an extremely monotonous tone. "Here to test for pregnancy? Not pregnant for now. Not pregnant." Dawn was immediately emotional and had no idea that what she was about to say next would be humiliating and shameful towards herself. "How am I not pregnant? All these while we've been working so hard daily." When Dawn arrived, she prayed all the way that the results that came out would be pregnant, and she was already mentally preparing herself to think only happy thoughts regarding it. However, when she heard what the doctor had said, her emotions were stirred up, and all the mental prep that she had done came crumbling down. Unfortunately, for the doctor that had seen all sorts of things, he thought that this girl before him had lost all her composure, and immediately put on a disdain-laced educating voice. "Little girl, I see that you're pretty young, and to do that kind of things every day isn't something you should be proud of. You've gotta be responsible for your own body, all right?" Then, he passed her checklist to her and reprimanded her. "Look at your list, I didn't want to tell you before that, but for your condition right now, it's impossible for you to have children. Young people these days, so worrisome. It's impossible for you to have children. It's impossible for you to have children. It's impossible for you to have children." All that was left in Dawn's mind was this sentence. It was in a loop, occupying her thoughts, and it was like a dagger that was digging her flesh out, crumbling it in heartlessness, and thrown to the ground. Dawn left the hospital feeling like a zombie. There was a little playground near the hospital, and there was a family of 3 having fun there. The little boy was riding on his father's shoulders, guffawing, and it was a heartwarming sight. As she stepped out further, she saw a little girl striding adorably towards her father, and as she ran into her father's arms, she planted a sloppy wet kiss on her father's cheek. Under the sunlight, that father was radiating with happiness. To build and spend time with your family was said to be the world's happiest and most genuinely simple thing to do, but she was stripping Jian of this right. As much as she wanted to him, she could not be this selfish. She could not. Perhaps, if she would do something since it was not too late yet. Jian, who was working, would call or text Dawn every time he was slightly freed up. However, after his afternoon meeting, he realized it had been an hour since she last replied to him. Usually, she would reply to his messages fairly quickly, like she was afraid that he would get mad. However, she did not even answer her phone today. "Sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable. Please try again later." "Sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable. Please try again later." Jian went berserk. "Sir Mose, where are you going?" Jean, who was just entering Jian's room to pass him some documents, bumped into Jian, whose jacket was still tightly clutched in his hands with a very thunderous expression, asked shrilly. Dawn's missing. Jian was already calling Sean and demanded coldly. Where have you sent my wife to this morning? She's gone now. Go get me the security footage of the school now. He was nearly yelling at the top of his lungs towards the end. Jian did not wait for Sean to respond before hanging up the phone, wore his jacket, and storming out to the elevator. Jin saw, quickly put the documents on the table, and followed him. Sir Mose, please calm down for now. Maybe Madam wasn't paying attention to her phone at school, or she had gone out with her friends and that's why you could not find her for now. Impossible. Jian barked. The elevator door had just opened and the two of them strode in. It was commendable that Sean was extremely efficient. The moment when they got out of the elevator, he had already called Jian. Sir Mose, the moment Madam went to school, she went to take leave and left. Also, I saw Jason Zook's figure near the door of the school. Sean reported. Jason Zook? Jian was fuming. In his head, there was already an image of Sergio. Jason did not dare to touch his people, but Jason together with Sergio, is it just for revenge? Get me Sergio right now. The moment we find Dawn is the moment we release him. Jian's eyes were bloodshot. It was like the monster that had been sealed up in the pits for a very long time had now risen up into the open, and he was out with a vengeance. Sergio, this better have nothing to do with you, or I want you and your entire family to die in the presence of my beloved. In the garage, Jian immediately opened his trunk and in the secret compartment, he took out a gun and placed it in his waistband. Then, he drove away, flooring the accelerator as he went. Give me a week's worth of all communications from Donnie and check her phone for its location. In the car, Jian spoke through his Bluetooth earpiece calmly as he ordered. Since she left the school, then find out the security footage of the entire Metropolis. Every street, every road, every alley. Looked closely. Even if you have to dig 3 feet deep into the ground to find her. His voice was stone cold. Each and every word that was said was a suppressant of the exploding emotions in his heart. Are you flipping crazy? Haven't you thought that maybe Dawn was hiding from you on purpose? She did not want to be with you, you two aren't suitable. Tom was with Sean at that time. Initially, due to Dawn's condition, he did not want them to be together. He did not have a chance to say it before, so now, he wanted to take this chance to separate the both of them. Shut the F up, Tom gently. Jian's heart was pricked by something. He thought of the unusualness that Dawn had portrayed recently. Was it the last few moments she wanted to spend together just to leave him after? He floored the accelerator once more and in a frenzy, she will not leave. She could not leave. 10 years, I have looked for her for 10 years. Each and every moment in these 10 years was agony. Day after day, night after night, I have finally found her. No one can take her away from me ever again. As for her, Jian's eyes hardened, his heart throbbing in pain as he said through gritted teeth. She can only dream about running away from me. Dawn, don't ever think of running. You cannot escape me. I've already lost you once, I don't want to go to that kind of agony again. He nearly ran over a little boy in his mad dash, and he slammed on his brakes. He punched the steering wheel and cussed out loud. When he saw the crowd, he panicked even more. Dawn, where are you? You said you will never leave. You will never run away from me. I won't go anywhere, I want to stay by your side. Unless somebody held me at gunpoint, asking me to leave so that you can live. Jian suddenly recalled the day when he was bitten by the wild dogs. She cried like a baby as she told him she would not leave unless she absolutely had to. So, Donnie, what have you gone through? Where are you? A sense of helplessness flooded Jian's heart. He did not even feel like that when he was held at the gunpoint. Anxiety filled his heart, his eyes were red-rimmed and there seems to be tears flowing down from it. Chapter 32. If I could not even go through this life without you, what more this life and beyond? Jian sped all the way to the police station, filed a missing persons report, and relied on the police force to find her. This time, we will find you, no matter where you are, to the ends of the earth. Sermos, Madam's phone was off. We can't get an exact location. We have already gone for Sergio, but he did not admit to having anything to do with Madam. Jean reported to him truthfully. Sermos, we've been to the Tymes, and the lady was not there. The one called Sheena and Shaban were questioned thoroughly. No one knew where she went. Sean reported through the phone almost immediately. As Jean heard it, his heart was in the mess. He did not dare to imagine what Dawn has gone through, since everything that he imagined, he thought of the worst. This man, he was afraid. Found it, Sermos. Madam went to the city hospital and had an OB/GYN appointment. Sean's voice immediately softened after that. The test results were that she was not pregnant, and the doctor told her that it will be impossible for her to get pregnant now. Boom. Immediately, his heart dropped to the bottom of the pit. He was angry, yet he was panicking. All the unusualness of her pestering him to do it every day. He thought she had finally opened up her heart, but it was just a test. Silly woman, so what if we don't have children? I just want you, I only want you. He could not imagine how upset and how hopeless she must have felt when she got to know about all this. She must have cried in the corner all alone, all by herself. Jeon tried to calm himself down. He had to find her immediately. He could not let her wallow in her hopelessness and helplessness. He tried to recall all the times where she would talk to him about where she would go often, and where were the places that she would go to calm herself down, and to heal when she was younger. Suddenly his eyes flashed when he thought of something. Then quickly called Go up the hills on the west side. Once he was done with the phone, he floored his accelerator once again and went all the way to the west. She once said, on the hills of the website there was an old man. When she was younger, any time she did not feel like going home, she would go to the old man and have a heart-to-heart talk, and her mood would improve tremendously after that. After the man had passed away, there was no one there anymore. Even when she was alone, she would go up to the mountains and sit for a while. Then, she would feel so much better. This was an abandoned hill with loads of greenery. Beyond the cliff was a dark valley shrouded by mist. Nor was there all you can hear were birds and crickets. Also, it was starting to get that since it was approaching evening. Dawn sat on the floor alone, her head buried in her knees. She lifted up her head to look at the cliff before her. Her eyes were swollen from all the crying. Why did the heavens have to torture her? She was replaced when she was young. She could have lived a life without having any worries and she would have a healthy childhood, but it has all come down to this. She tried to bring herself up as somebody happy and bubbly, someone who was not tormented by dark memories. She had even found somebody she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She had already opened up her heart and had decided to love him wholeheartedly, but the heavens seemed to have it against her since almost instantly, she would fall back to her hell and would not be able to climb up from it. Donnie. Suddenly, a familiar yet tender voice came from behind her, but she did not dare to turn back. Her hands gripping tightly on her pants, tears flowed down once again as her frail body quivered with anxiety. She still did not dare to turn back. Jeon ran through several red lights, parked his car by the hill, ran all the way up to see a little curled-up silhouette from a distance. His heart broke for her as if he could feel what she was feeling too. Donnie baby, let's go home. He approached her carefully, wanting to wrap his arms around her and warm her up. When she heard footsteps behind her, Dawn stood up immediately and took 2 steps back. She looked tearfully at the man that came for her. She moved her mouth to say something only for her to give up before she could say anything. She was standing at the edge of the cliff, so he dared not go towards her any further in fear. His eyes were filled with sorrow and helplessness, like a war god that had been sapped of energy. All that he had left was a body, strengthless and helpless. Donnie, I already know all about it. I don't need children, I don't need anything, I just need you, only you. Come back to me please. Other than you I don't care about anything, Donnie. His voice was pleading her to come back. But I care. I can't bring myself to drag you down for this life and beyond. I can't do anything for you, and now, I can't even bear children for you. I care. I care. Dawn's heart was bleeding when she saw him like that, but she had to speak while she could. At that moment, Jian suddenly burst out in a smile. However, that smile had no life in it, but was filled with helplessness. Without you, I can't even go through this life. What more this life and beyond? Without you, I can't even enjoy the happiness of being your husband. What more to build a family? Believe me, Donnie, trust in me, okay. Let's go home. He quietly approached her when she was in a daze and was about to reach out to pull her in. Don't come any further, go away. I will not go back. Dawn took a few more steps back and was inching closer to the edge of the cliff. She cried and yelled. Don't force me. Just go find a healthy someone else and move on with your life. Stop looking for me. Her voice was hackling from all the crying, breaking Jian's heart. Okay, as long as you don't continue backing up. Stop moving back, I won't force you. Jian quickly stopped in his tracks in great distress, his hands hung in mid-air. He was not even this afraid when he had to face vicious business owners in his business. Then leave. Go down this hill and don't ever come for me again for the rest of our lives. Dawn bellowed with firm determination and riled up emotions. Jian looked at her and was so sad he smiled instead. Only, that smile was like a tear in the otherwise beautiful sunset, laced with hopelessness, coldness, and heavy-heartedness. Abruptly, he took out his gun and pointed it at his own heart. Jian, what are you doing? Dawn looked at what he was doing and was stunned, then she panicked. Put down the gun. As she said it, she had already run to his side, trying to snatch the gun away from him, but his strength was too great. Then, the solemn, cursed voice rang. Dawn, I, Jian Mose, only want you for the rest of my life. You and you only. I almost died when I first met you, but you gave me hope to live and gave meaning back into my life. I have been looking for you for so many years, I've never stopped thinking of you. I try my best to stand at the top of the food chain because I was thinking, when I finally found you, I just want to have the best things in the world in front of you. Except for myself, I don't trust anyone else with you. Donnie, I love you, so bad that it hurts. Stay with me, okay? Will you come back? I just want you. Don't say any more, I won't go back with you. When Dawn said this, she was also heartbroken, but she could not be soft-hearted and could not hurt him. Then kill me, I can't bear even a day of losing you again. Boom. The sound that resounded through the skies bloomed with a bright, painful, eye-catching smell of blood on Jian's chest. The smell of blood rushed into the tip of her nose and dyed Dawn's eyes red. No, no. Jian. Jian. Don't scare me. Get up, you. Dawn desperately yelled at Jian who had tumbled over, his chest was stained with blood, she trembled with panic, hugged him, and yelled at him. He took his last breath, reached a bloodied hand towards her face, and smiled at her. I'm sorry, I chickened out this time. If you insist on leaving, I will have no point in living. Why do you want to be like this? Why are you so extreme? Dawn was heartbroken and terrified. It's not extreme, how I came to have all I have now, it isn't extreme. How else could I build the strongest castle for you? Even if I was extreme, I wasn't able to keep you. Chapter 33, Her Man Will Live Well. When Jian had spoken his last words, his hands dropped down lifelessly as he closed his eyes. No, no. Jian, get up, I'm sorry. Ah. Dawn hugged him like a madwoman and cried out bitterly. Sorry, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. You get up. Jean, Sean, and others who had just arrived heard the gunshot. They were so frightened that they quickened their steps. When they arrived, they only saw Jian covered in blood. Dawn, what have you done? Sean quickly ran over and grabbed Jian's body from Dawn's arms, and everyone was dumbfounded. I'm sorry, yes. Dawn doesn't know what she could do except to apologize, but apologizing was useless. It was all her fault, but don't touch him. Tom gently glared at Dawn angrily, knowing that time was running out, and hurriedly ushered Sean put to Jian down and administered emergency treatment. They were all used to the scenes of life and death, and they were trying to race against time. Fortunately, Tom Jinli just came out of surgery and still had his tools. He brought the medical kit up because he was afraid that Dawn would do something stupid. As Tom Jinli tried to save Jian, Sean hurriedly ordered people below to bring up the stretcher in the trunk. Stretcher, stretcher. Quickly. Quickly. Tom Jinli shouted in a deep voice. The stretcher came up quickly, and Jian was taken away. Dawn was left alone on the mountain. No one offered to take her home with her. They all hated her. How long has it been since Jian has encountered these deadly dangers? It's all because of her. If it weren't for her, who could hurt him? No one knew what happened, but they all understood that it was all because of her. Dawn ran down the mountain, but it rained heavily. For an instant, it was as if the sky was leaking. The heavy rain was so heavy that she could not see the road in front of her. She was trapped at the foot of the mountain for a whole night. Her mobile phone ran out of battery and she had no money. She almost ran all the way back to Regal, embarrassed and pitiful. Her clothes were drenched, then dried along the way, and it was already the evening of the second day when she arrived at the Regal. Please, I beg all of you, let me in. I want to see him. I want to see him, please. I beg you, please. But no matter how much begged, everyone seemed to have not heard her at all, and no one paid attention to her. Suddenly, Dawn saw a helper bringing out trash from the inside. It was filled with blood-stained white gauze. Then, another helper took out some furniture and Jian's belongings from the inside and threw them at the gate for the garbage men. What is the situation? Why are his belongings being thrown out? Dawn felt something suffocating her throat in an instant and she could not breathe. She could not believe it, did not want to believe it as she backed off murmuring. No, no, he won't die, he will definitely not die. Her heart was crushed. She wanted to rush in while the helper was not paying attention, but she was directly blocked at the gate. Jean, will you let me in, please? I want to see him, please. Dawn saw that it was Jean who stopped her, and she clung to the corner of his clothes like a lifeline and begged. This time, Jean was not smiling and yanked the corners of his clothes that Dawn was clutching with a heavy face. Regardless of her embarrassment and shame at the moment, he tried his best to suppress his anger so he did not yell at her face. You want to see him? What, the corpse? Did you think he can still live if he shot himself in the heart? Did you think he is not flesh and blood? Have you ever thought that he is also just an ordinary man that would feel heartbroken and helpless, no matter how extraordinary he looks on the surface? Do you know how much suffering he has endured for you? But you killed him. Jean yelled uncontrollably. You're the one that took his life. I'm sorry. I know I was wrong, everything is my fault. Dawn's tears had never stopped. She did not know what to do or even what to say. If she knew it would kill him, she would not do it, even if it killed her. At this moment, she just wanted to see him again, even if it was his. Leave! Jean pushed her away ruthlessly, strode to the garage, and drove away. After Jean left, Dawn saw all kinds of advanced medical equipment being moved out of the house. There were even doctors who were in a serious discussion with Tom, who had finally shaken hands with them with a solemn expression and left. Dawn's heart seemed to have been split in half. She could not sit still and she was anxious. She must find a way to sneak in. Wow, what's the matter? Kicked out by Jian. Sk. It's really amusing to look at your downcast appearance. Suddenly, Sheena's voice was heard, her face full of mockery and ridicule. Dawn turned her head weakly and glanced. It was really Sheena, and Shaban and Neve were standing next to her. Later, she learned that Enzo had asked them to come and visit her. That day, Jian's people went to the house to find Dawn. When Enzo was still giving a speech abroad, he heard the housekeeper report to him about it and was very worried about Dawn, but his speech was not over, and it was difficult to get last-minute emergency plane tickets, so he reluctantly asked Sheena and Xiaoban to come over first to see what happened since Xiaoban was her mother anyway. And in his heart, Sheena was a well-behaved and sensible child. After Dawn glanced at them, she ignored them and walked away. She wanted to go round Regal to see where she could sneak in. She did not care about anything else. However, Sheena misinterpreted Dawn's faint glance at them and her walking away as her being haughty and holding herself in higher regard than them. She rushed over angrily and pulled at Dawn, grinning mockingly. "Look at you like this. If I didn't know, I would have thought that some homeless person had wandered their way all the way here. How embarrassing. I'm in a very bad mood today. You'd better not try anything with me. Go back to where you came from." Dawn broke away from her and interrupted her next taunt. "You are in a bad mood, but I am in a good mood." Sheena laughed happily, her mouth grinning all the way to her ears. "Why, your Jian won't come to protect you today. Is he dead or has he given up on you?" "Ah!" Slap. Almost immediately when Sheena had said the word dead, Dawn slapped her fiercely and glared. "He won't die. If you dare to talk nonsense again, I will tear your mouth apart." "Sheenie!" Xiaoban hurried over and pulled Sheena aside. She rushed over just when she saw Dawn raise her hand, but she was still too late. Looking at the fingerprints on Sheena's face, her heart broke. "You wretched girl, how dare you slap Sheenie? Are you tired of living? I'll beat you to death." As soon as Xiaoban finished speaking, she started to roll up her sleeves, bared her teeth open, and clawed her way to teach Dawn a lesson. Chapter 34. If she slaps you, just endure it. However, Dawn was no longer the little girl who allowed Xiaoban to scold her and hit her as she pleased. Dawn's eyes became cold. When Xiaoban rushed up, Dawn raised her foot and kicked Xiaoban directly on her stomach, causing Xiaoban to howl and clutch her stomach in pain. Fortunately, when she was a child, her second brother taught her some self-defense. Before this, she still treated Xiaoban like her own mother, so she would only run and did not fight back. She stopped showing mercy when she knew the truth. "How dare you beat up your own mother?" Xiaoban yelled. "Dawn, you have indeed lived long enough." Sheena saw that her biological mother was hurt. She was furious and wanted to rush to avenge her mother. At this time, she so happened to be standing behind Dawn. So she wanted to rush in, pull her hair, and press her down on the ground alongside Xiaoban to teach her a lesson. Before she got close to Dawn, she was stopped by a powerful hand that suddenly appeared. "Who is it, disturbing the peace at the door of my Regal?" Sean, who had just come out from the inside, saw that Sheena was going to attack Dawn, so he walked over quickly to stop her. Sheena recognized Sean since he had been to the Tymes a few times. At this moment, she really thought that Dawn was kicked out by Jian and that Jian had grown tired of her. Sheena immediately put on an aggrieved face and made to seduce Sean. "It's her, it's this woman, she started it first. If she slaps you, then just endure it, and get out if you can't take it." Sean was sharp-tongued, but now he is full of worry because of Jian's injury, and Dawn was the one their Sir Mose held in his arms. No matter how bad the situation looked, she still should not be left alone and bullied by others. "You? How can you talk to me like that?" Sheena persisted. Upon seeing this, Sean immediately ordered the two guards that were at the door and signaled for them to chase Sheena and Xiaoban away so as not to affect the peace here. When Dawn saw that Sean was still kind to her, she wanted to step forward and beg him again, but Sean left right after that. Perhaps it was true that the greatest kindness Jian's comrades had right now was not yelling at her. When Sheena was asked to leave, she shouted at Dawn, "I will definitely tell Daddy about today. Watch out, ungrateful scum." Dawn only had Jian in her mind now, and she could not be bothered with anyone else. It was getting dark. She has already surveyed Regal's perimeters. There were no gaps for her to sneak in. The courtyard wall is too high for her to climb over. For someone of Jian's status, Their residential villas must be strictly designed to leave no way for others to sneak in, otherwise, their personal safety could not be guaranteed. Dawn was sitting on the grass outside, thinking hard about how to get in when she suddenly heard a dog barking. Blasty! Dawn's eyes lit up when she heard Blasty's cry. Blasty was a retired police dog that was in Jian's care. She would also feed it regularly when she was at Regal, and Blasty's doghouse happened to be the only surveillance blind spot in Regal, because Blasty was more alert than all kinds of high-tech surveillance. Dawn found hope and glanced around and walked towards Blasty. There was a small hole in the wall, which was usually the exit Blasty used. Dawn looked down at herself as she walked, and muttered, "I should be able to crawl in from here." In the Regal living room, Tom, Jinli, Jean, Sean, and others were in a discussion, and everyone looked solemn. Why isn't Sermoz awake yet? How nerve-wracking. Jean sat on the sofa with his hands buried in his face. The last time he was shot was 3 years ago. In the past few years, all businesses have been very peaceful. He survived the cutthroat business only to fall in the hands of Dawn Tyme. Tom was even more annoyed since he was against Jian staying with Dawn. Fortunately, the shot missed the heart by a little bit. If it were to edge towards the center just a little bit, and it would be too late to administer emergency treatment. Sean continued. Tom Jinli's eyebrows sank as if he had thought of something. He raised his eyes to look at the two of them before him. Do you think Jian planned this? Otherwise, with his marksmanship, would he even miss? Was he deliberately threatening Dawn with his life? After Tom said that, he shook his head and denied his hypothesis. No, he didn't know that we would arrive in time. If we were too late, he would have bled to death. Masters, madam. No, Miss Dawn got in from the dog hole. Do you want to chase her out? Abruptly, the housekeeper stepped forward to report the news from the security. Of course. Tom stood up excitedly, wanting to chase her out. Jean hurriedly got up and stopped him. Why don't you see what she is going to do? After all, Sermoz would still ask for her when he wakes up. Let's first see what she wants to do. Maybe she would leave us some evidence that would make Sermoz wake up and give up on her. Anyway, she is such a frail, petite woman. Are you afraid that she can't be thrown out? Yes, if someone wanted to throw her out, wouldn't it just be a piece of cake? Dawn sneaked in from the dog hole. Fortunately, Blasty was on her side and did not bark, and instead rubbed against her face lovingly when she made her way in. She did not dare to go through the main entrance, so she slipped in quietly through the side door. She guessed that Jian should be in the bedroom, so she sneaked in all the way through the side door. She was so nervous that she did not even have time to think about why she was able to sneak in so smoothly. On the big white bed, Jian was lying quietly with his chest bared and the center of his chest wrapped in gauze. Blood was still oozing slowly from the gauze. His face was pale, and he laid there so motionlessly it was eerily quiet and scary. Dawn covered her mouth in a panic. She was afraid that she would cry out and be discovered, but the tears still poured down uncontrollably. Dawn walked gently to his side and stood there looking at him for a long, long time. Why are you so silly? I really don't deserve you. You are so perfect. How can I be worthy of having you? Dawn sat paralyzed by the bed, muttering incoherently. It's all my fault. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you to the edge at that time, but I just want you to stop thinking about me. It's better to chop it off before it continues to fester. Holding his hand and stroking his face, her tears could not stop at all. Jian, will you get up please? I miss you, I need you, and I won't go anywhere. I'll stay by your side obediently, and not going anywhere. Get up, okay? She seemed to be talking to herself. After a while, she stood up and lowered her head. A soft kiss fell on his pale lips, and big tears dripped on his face and eyes. If you want to take a break, then I will accompany you, and I will accompany you here, and wait for you to wake up. Dawn sat on the ground and leaned on the side of the bed, holding Jian's hand, looking at him, and talking with him, for a long, long time. She fell asleep at some point in time. When she came down from the mountain, she was caught in the rain. She did not even eat anything. She fell asleep so heavily that she did not even notice that the hand that holding Jian's was held back by him. In the middle of the night, Tom routinely came in to check on Jian and saw Dawn lying on the side of the bed fast asleep. To his surprise, Jian was holding her hand. Chapter 35, right into his arms. Jian, can you hear me? Tom gently was surprised and excited. He quickly stepped forward to open Jian's eyes for examination and hurriedly brought the stethoscope and placed it on Jian's heart. His heartbeat had normalized, and his life was saved, but why was he not responding? Tom gently, even rudely patted him on the face. "FQ Jian, get up if you can hear me." At this time, Jean and Sean also arrived at the door. When they heard Tom's voice, they thought Jian had woken up and ran in excitedly. "Is he awake? Is he awake?" Jean asked excitedly. "His body has clearly returned to normal, but he's not awake yet." Tom frowned and checked his heartbeat again, which had basically returned to normal, but Jian was just not waking up, as if his body had been separated from his soul. "An out-of-body experience," Jean blurted out. "Or did the soul not come down from the mountain?" "Sir Mose, wake up," Jean said as he approached him and shouted. At this moment, Sean also called out to him, but there was no response. "Take this girl away and I'll check him again." Tom glanced at Dawn and said to Jean and Sean, "Okay." Sean hurriedly bent over to pick Dawn up and allowed her head to rest on his arm, but as soon as he touched her, he felt the heat she was emitting. "She has a fever." Sean's eyebrows froze, and he subconsciously reached for her forehead with his hand. It was really hot. "Then, take her away as soon as possible." Tom gently still had medical ethics. "Go get her some antipyretics, and I'll be there after I check Jian again." Sean nodded and immediately picked Dawn up. As soon as he pulled Dawn's hand away from Jian's hand, Jian suddenly opened his eyes and exclaimed weakly, "Don't go." Yes, the man woke up all of a sudden, as if he was a vampire that came back to life as he stared straight at the ceiling, which startled Tom. After the three of them looked at each other in surprise and joy, they hurriedly leaned forward. "Sir Mose, you finally woke up. You are awake. What are you doing? You are going to scare us to death." The three of them could not stop talking excitedly. Jian merely turned his head and glanced at them faintly, and asked, "Where is Dawn?" Sure enough, the first thing he did ask for when he woke up was her. She's a little tired, and Sean had taken her to rest." Tom hurriedly interrupted Jean, afraid that he would say that Dawn had a fever and make Jian worry. "Let's not talk about her. How are you feeling now?" Tom gently carefully observed Jian. When Jian heard this, he did not care what Tom had said. Hurriedly turned his head, looked at the door to see Sean carrying Dawn out, and he immediately said, "Stop, put her by my side to rest, and I will look at her." In a coma, he felt a voice talking to him all the time. He felt her and felt her tears. It was so beautiful, and he could hold her tightly once more. If it was just a dream, he would rather not wake up again, but suddenly, someone pulled him away, and his heart was empty. He was about to chase after her in a panic. Fortunately, most fortunately, he opened his eyes and she was still there. "She's already been frightened by you, so let Sean take her downstairs and let the helpers wash her, change her into comfortable clothes so she gets a good night's sleep, okay?" Tom repeatedly coaxed Jian. "You will scare her again if you look like this." Jian turned his head and saw that she was a little messy looking in Sean's arms, and her clothes were also stained with dust, and she looked exhausted. "Then take care of her, let her take a good rest, and no one disturbs her." Jian did not want to scare her anymore, so he took Tom's advice. Jian's eyes trembled, stormy waves surged through them. He closed his eyes again. "Finally, I managed to make you stay." Taking advantage of the time gap between him closing his eyes, Tom quickly asked Jean to push the inspection equipment over, and carefully checked Jian again. Normal heart function. Normal hepatobiliary function. normal lungs, normal kidney function, normal nervous system. Everyone who heard Tom Ginley's normal announcements finally felt relieved, as if a weight had lifted off their hearts. Sir Mose, you are too impulsive. You have always been so rational it's scary. What happened this time? Now that you've calmed down, think about it again. Would you still do it? Jean was angry and anxious. They were true brothers not related by blood but would give up their lives for each other. They could not bear to see him risking his life like this. It's too extreme to think rationally. Jean looked at the ceiling blankly. Just as everyone breathed a sigh of relief that he felt that he regretted the impulse at that time, they heard him continue. But she is the bane of all my rationality, the trigger point of all madness. I can't bear to see the object of my desire blatantly escape from me in front of my eyes. That day, he saw the undisguised intention to escape in Dawn's eyes, and the look in her eyes told him that they could not be persuaded to stay. Except for extreme situations, he did not know what to do, as if she would disappear after one more second of delay. All the impulses, all the extremes, all the incomprehension, all the horror and ferocity, all arose because of her. Dawn was given medicine, and as soon as the fever subsided, she woke up. Jean. Dawn started calling for him as soon as she opened her eyes. It was the morning of the next day. She opened the blanket and got out of bed in a panic and ran towards Jean. She was arranged to rest in the guest room on the first floor, so she went up the stairs barefoot so anxiously if she could combine 3 steps of stairs in one, she would. Finally, she reached Jean's bedroom and did not bother knocking on the door. She just turned the door handle and rushed right in. Hiss. As soon as Dawn rushed in, she felt that she had knocked onto something, and then she heard a weak cry of pain. Dawn raised her head abruptly, her eyes turned red in an instant as she saw a living Jean standing in front of her. She could not even believe it and secretly pinched her thigh. The pain surged into her heart. He had really woken up. You finally woke up, you finally woke up. Dawn plunged into his arms, hugged him tightly, and kept apologizing. I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I'm really sorry. Only to realize that his heart was hurt and she could not hold him like this. She panicked, let go of Jean, and retreated, but as soon as she raised his foot and was about to retreat, she was pulled back into his arms, hugged tighter, and heard his hoarse voice boom, "Do you want to escape again? Dawn, you can't escape unless I die." He hugged her with all his strength regardless of whether he was hurting himself and questioned her. He survived death but still wanted her. Even so, what was with her still wanting to escape? Did she not trust him? Or was she just a coward? Dawn's heart was broken into pieces. Not running away anymore, never running ever again. Dawn's tears broke like a water dam and soaked his clothes. No matter what happens in the future, I will stay by your side, and I will be obedient from now on. Sob sob. Dawn cried a river. Let me go for now. You still have injuries on your body. You can't do this. Go back and lie down. Dawn stretched out her hand and patted him on the back to remind him. Just tell me what you want to do and I'll help you. You go and lie down. Just now, Jean wanted to see her as soon as he opened his eyes, so he got out of bed to go out. As soon as he opened the door, his sweetheart crashed right into his arms and at that moment, his whole world was bright again. I just want to hold you like this for the rest of my life, Donnie. Did you know, when I was a child, my life was a very dark place? You brought me the brightest sunshine. You healed my childhood. I could even forgive all the darkness in this world just for you. So, don't go, never go, won't you trust me? You are the most perfect girl in the world. The heavens may mock you, but I will do my best to give you a life without regrets, and my life, I only want you. If you want a child, I will ask the best doctor to cure you. I will do whatever you want for you. I will leave no regrets in your life. But I just want you. Please, don't leave me again. I will do anything, just as long as you stay. Chapter 36, If I was a cursed fool, you're my only salvation. Sob sob sob. Dawn could barely talk after she heard what Jian said. All she could do was sob. How lucky was she to be able to be the recipient of such care and pampering from such a man. Jian finally let go of her, put his hands on her shoulders, and looked at her crying eyes. His eyes were full of pain as he lowered his head to kiss off her tears. He said gently, "Donnie, don't cry anymore, my heart aches when you cry." Her frail shoulders were twitching as she cried, and his heart was broken by her crying. He could not help but lower his head and kiss her scarlet-red lips. This time, it was a tenderness that could melt the bones, as if he was treating a rare treasure. He was afraid that she would break with such a strong force, and the kiss was lingeringly long. Dawn suddenly felt lighter in the fog of her emotions as she was picked up by Jian and headed towards the bed. He was still injured. Dawn opened her eyes wide in shock and refused in a frenzied panic. "Put me down, quickly. You can't carry me," your wound would burst open. Dawn did not dare to move, she could only signal him with her eyes. "You're not allowed to get out of bed without shoes in the future." Seeing that she was barefoot, Jian frowned and swept her off her feet. Dawn, who was finally placed on the bed, looked at Jian very unhappily. Didn't he know how to take care of himself? Since you want to grow old together, you can't disregard your life like this. Jian, can you not disregard your body like this in the future? You want me to take care of my body, but what about you? Do you know that I'm worried for you if you're like this? I don't want you to get hurt again. My body is fit and strong. See, even a gun can't kill me." Before Jian could finish his sentence, Dawn stretched out her finger to cover his nonsense-spewing mouth and said quickly, "Ba ba. Stop it with the nonsense." Dawn looked at him and muttered, "Don't do this again." Jian watched her remove the hand that was covering his mouth, placed it on her heart, and swore solemnly while looking straight at her. "If you run away again, I will do the same, but next time I won't miss. I'll shoot straight at my heart." Dawn's pupils trembled, and her hands tightened. She was grateful that the heavens did not take her hero away, but it was only later that Dawn learned that Jian had planned for this to happen just so he could win her with his life. After all, how would a man that could only shoot bullseyes miss his mark? Fortunately, this time he won the bet. Jian turned around and took out her slippers for her, and asked her casually, "You have been wronged for the past 2 days. They bullied you. They will never dare to treat you like this again." A sly look flashed in his eyes while he talked. He woke up very early in the morning and was afraid that Dawn was still not up, so he watched the security footage for the past 2 days. He saw everything that happened, especially her eager heart that was so desperate to see him she even crawled through the dog hole to see him. When he watched it, the corners of his mouth lifted subconsciously. "It's not bullying." Dawn did not directly deny it. She knew that since Jian said that, he knew everything. There was no need to prevaricate or conceal it, but she explained, "They are all worried for you. After all, you were so badly injured. If they didn't treat me like that, they cannot be called your brothers and comrades, so don't blame them. Just put it all behind since they all genuinely want the best for you." Dawn spoke to him gently, interrupting Jian's intention to bend down and put on shoes for her in time while talking. She quickly put them on and stood on the ground and smiled softly at him. Her smile was curative, and it can always make him feel at ease in troubled times, settled and peaceful. Jian saw her chuckling and rubbed her little head. His eyes became slightly cold, and he asked in a deep voice, "Could it be that Sheena and Shaban Neve are also doing it for my own good?" Dawn was taken aback for a moment. She had forgotten about the two of them, and she didn't know how Sheena would complain to Enzo. As Dawn thought, she raised her eyebrows, looked up at Jian, and smiled. "I didn't lose to them either. They were the ones that lost, it's just. Don't worry, I have arranged for someone to send that audio surveillance to the Times. If your father is a sensible person, he won't blame you. After all, they are the ones who were rude and would not leave you alone." Jian saw her concerns, knowing that she was not afraid of Sheena's mother and her, but worried that they would talk slander to discredit Dawn's image. Dawn's emotions were not completely under control. So when Jian said that, tears were threatening to fall again. She stepped directly in front of him, gently and tightly hugged his waist while sobbing uncontrollably. Why are you so kind to me? You just woke up and you have already taken care of my affairs. But all I've been doing is hurt you. I hate myself so much. Sob. Tell me what I have to do to be worthy of everything you do for me. My little silly girl. Jian lowered his head and kissed the tips of her fuzzy hair, raised his hand, and patted her back lightly. My life is baptized with light because of you. If I was the cursed fool, then you are my only salvation. If I don't treat you well, my life would still be in darkness. Now that I have seen the light, I just can't bear to let it dim anymore. You don't have to do anything. You can just stand there quietly and you'd be more worthy to be with me than anyone else. Donnie, you staying by my side is the biggest and best way to show me your affection for me. Dawn tried to hold back her tears and raised her little head from his arms and looked at him with tears in her eyes. After looking at him for a long time, she suddenly stood on tiptoe and kissed him and assured him with an okay. Jian pettishly tapped her little nose, reached out for the wet wipes on the bedside, gently wiped her tears, and said to her, "Silly little girl, your eyes are swollen with crying. How are you gonna go back to your old house later?" "Go back to the Tymes?" Dawn asked in surprise. "Don't you plan to go back?" "Your father got off the plane at noon and got home about 1 o'clock, Jian said truthfully. "When you left suddenly that day, I tried looking for you at the Tymes, so I think Sheena and Xiaoban should have been sent by your father to see if anything happened to you. He is still worried about you, but he still doesn't know the viciousness of the mother and daughter duo. I want to stay with you." Dawn hurriedly exclaimed. "It's not an urgent matter anyway. I'll go tomorrow. You just got up. Silly girl, I'll go back with you," Jian said in all seriousness. "You were accosted outside the door that day. Sheena and her mother must have gloated that you were abandoned, or thought that you had suffered a lot of pain with me. In this case, if you go back alone in the future, they will definitely taunt you and mock you. That's what I don't want to see. My girl, I will give you the utmost respect, and I will not allow anyone to humiliate you, even if it is just words." Chapter 37, Jian, could you behave yourself? But you still have injuries on your body. You can't be so stubborn anymore, Dawn said unhappily. "I'll be okay, besides, we don't even have to walk there. The car will arrive at the doorstep." Jian compromised with a smile to her dissatisfied eyes. "Well, I assure you that I will not move about unnecessarily when I get there. If I feel any discomfort at my wound, we will come back immediately, okay?" No. Dawn threw out a string of no's, her pretty face tightly scrunched up in a frown. "It doesn't work that way. You are not allowed to go anywhere today, just lie in bed." Dawn nagged like an old woman towards Jian and pointed at the bed. "Go back and lie down." Okay, we won't go. This was the first time Dawn had thrown a fit at him. The effect was very significant. He hurriedly said, "I'll listen to my madam. Let's first have some dinner, and then lie down with me, my madam." Jian pecked kisses on her face lightly. Okay. Dawn wanted to be at home these 2 days to take care of him anyway. Jian ordered for the food to be delivered to the room. While they were eating, Tom Jinli came. Hearing a knock on the door, Jian muttered a soft, "Come in." Tom pushed the door, entered in, and saw Jian feeding Dawn with some salad. These public displays of affection always catch me off guard. Tom Jinli joked as he walked in with some anti-inflammatory medicine, disinfectant, and some gauze. The appearance of Tom made Dawn's heart tremble. She knew that Tom was very resistant to her staying by Jian's side. He probably thought that she was not worthy of him. Jian also knew Tom's temperament, so he simply got up and kissed Dawn on her cheeks with a face full of contentment and happiness, and then he glanced at Tom as if to announce to him, "No matter whether you agree or not, I will not be with anyone else other than her in this lifetime." Sigh. Tom gently looked helplessly disgusted. There is still a whole living human standing right here. Can you control yourself? Tom's tone was visibly casual, as if he had accepted the scene in front of him. Here, these things are all yours. Tom gently pointed to the medical box on the bedside table, and then looked at Dawn. Then he stared at Jian meaningfully and said, "You've gotta stay but the next 2 days. Tighten your belt, I tell you. No action movies in the next few days. Did you hear me?" Jian naturally understood the meaning behind Tom's words, but Dawn was obviously oblivious for now. Looking at Dawn, who was innocent and ignorant, Tom teased her unexpectedly. "Madam, if you have need of me, I can be of assistance at any time." The smile on his face deepened, and it was the kind of meaningfully ambiguous smile that made Dawn's face burn up all of a sudden. "I don't know what you are talking about." Dawn rolled her eyes at him in embarrassment, probably finally realizing what he meant. Tom gently rolled his eyes to the heavens as a sign of disdain. "Dawn, why don't you come out and let me give you some advice on how to care for the patient?" Tom gently looked at Dawn meaningfully, then looked at Jian as he tried to explain, "It's about taking care of your injuries." "Sure thing." Dawn agreed immediately. It made sense for Tom to give her notes on taking care of such a serious gunshot wound. Dawn had already stood up and walked towards Tom, but when she passed Jian, he stopped her. Jian frowned, grabbed Dawn by her hand, raised his eyebrows, and looked at Tom, his face full of displeasure, and said, "What is it that you can't say in front of me?" He glanced at Tom fiercely, his eyes full of caution. He knew that Tom had a lot of dissatisfaction regarding Dawn and thought that she was not worthy of Jian. However, the more he showed his displeasure, the more Jian would not allow his girl to meet him alone, or he would not know what Tom would say to make Dawn feel uncomfortable. Tom looked at how Jian was afraid as if he would eat his wife alive, and had the sudden urge to beat Jian up. "Why do you baby your woman so much?" Tom expressed his exasperation with some gesturing with his hands and feet. In return, Jian merely gazed at him faintly and asked, Forget it, forget it." Tom reluctantly compromised and stuffed a list of precautions into Dawn's hand, looked at her, and sighed. "Actually, I don't want you to become Jian's wife." As soon as Tom spoke, Jian seemed to know what he wanted to say, and he signaled for Tom's next words to be swallowed up and to never see the light of day. Tom shuddered faintly when he was stared at by Jian's cold eyes. He did not dare to complete his sentence and immediately changed the direction of his sentence as he continued. "Actually, I don't want Jian to get hurt again in the future. And since you're the only one who can hurt him in this world, I hope you could stay by his side and take good care of him for the rest of your life." As a friend, Tom did not want his comrade to marry such a woman, but as a bro, he could see that this woman was Jian's life, and if he could not separate them, he should help him keep the both of them together. Dawn was moved that Tom had finally recognized her as Jian's wife. She was just about to speak, but Tom continued to speak. "Don't worry, you two, Tom gently, will swear on my career to make sure you'll have your babies, otherwise I will never practice medicine again." Tom gently firmly promised. With that being said, he looked at Jian teasingly, stretched out his hand, patted him on the shoulder, and said in the tone of an old hen, "Young man, you've got to work harder, but for now, you've got to take a break." Seeing Dawn's blushing, awkward face, Jian immediately issued an order to Tom. "You can leave now, the door is right there." "You?" Tom stared at Jian angrily, turned around and saw the strong "leave now" message in his eyes, and closed the door heavily behind him. At that time, Dawn was still standing next to Jian, and he was still holding her hand. As the door of the room closed, Jian yanked her hard. "Ah!" Dawn fell directly on his long legs as she lost her balance. Dawn was startled and stood up as if she had been electrocuted. She frowned and glared at Jian. "What are you doing? Don't you know that you still have injuries on your body? Can you behave yourself?" Dawn felt that this man really did not care about his injury at all and warned him angrily. "If you're gonna be like this, I will take a rope and tie your hands and feet to the bed until you are healed." Jian burst out in laughter when he heard this, looked at Dawn with an evil glint in his eyes, and said meaningfully, "Now I know my madam likes these kinds of things." Jian abruptly stood up and lowered his head to her ear affectionately. "Why don't we try it now?" As soon as he finished his sentence, he lifted up his hands and took Dawn into his arms. Dawn did not dare to struggle, fearing that she would aggravate his wound, so she could only complain angrily in his arms. "Jian, can you behave yourself?" Jian's smile deepened, and he put some distance in between the two of them and looked at her with a wickedly charming glint in his eyes. The corners of his mouth softly raised and the tone of his voice was bone deep. "I can behave. I can also behave." Chapter 38. Very, very small. Not as big as yours. Yours looks the best. Whoosh. Dawn froze, her face flushed all the way to the tip of her ears. How could this man misinterpret the meaning of others so shamelessly? How perverted. She was no match against his brash banter. Lowbrow. Dawn cursed in a low voice. "I don't know if you like my brows, but I know you like it when I go down low." Jian suavely continued her sentence. He had clearly decided to tease her deliberately today. "You are so perverted." Dawn finally pushed him away angrily. At that moment, her brain was occupied by shame and anger, so she could not care less about other shameless things. Hiss. Dawn had accidentally touched Jian's wound with that push, causing him to hiss in pain. His painful expression immediately snapped Dawn back to her senses and she took a step forward hastily. "What's the matter? Did I touch your wound?" Sorry. Dawn looked up at him exasperatingly yet helplessly and said, "Just tell me, what exactly do you want right now?" She was done with him, and she was at wit's end with him. This man was practically using his injuries as a license to commit crimes. Jian looked at her helplessly innocent and pitiful appearance, which looked very adorable, and immediately rubbed her little head, as he said softly, Okay, I won't tease you anymore. I'll go lie down and rest." Dawn took off from school these few days to be with Jian and to make sure he would rest. She was afraid that he would go directly to work without giving himself a chance to rest. Also, Jian had not rested properly for an extremely long time. In the past, he lived life on the edge of danger every day. After his company had stabilized and all businesses were on track, he wanted to do his best to give Dawn the best of everything, so he showed no mercy to himself as he continued to work ardently day by day. In the past, if he had been shot, he would still put on a strong front and be present at work despite his injuries. He was afraid that if he was not there to keep watch, there would be a break in his team's morale and his enemies would use it as an opportunity to launch their attacks. That was why Jian wanted to take this opportunity to rest properly in that few days. With her by his side, it would be the most beautiful moment in the world. The two of them were lying on the bed. As Jian was accompanying Dawn in her drama binge watch, there was a knock on the door. A helper was at the door with medication. As Dawn hurriedly got out of bed to open the door, she was stopped by Jian. "You watch TV, I'll go." As he was saying that, he had already gotten out of bed and opened the door. It was the medicine that Tom Jinli had prescribed for Dawn before he left. Dawn fainted and sported a high fever last night. After Tom's examination, it was fortunately not anything serious, only that Dawn had been caught in the rain, was starving, and was highly stressed, so Tom had prescribed some sedatives and some medication for her to fend off the fever. Pills and tablets have always had an unpleasant, the lingering aftertaste after consumption, and since Dawn had been on medication the past few days, she felt like her tongue was laced in permanent bitterness. When she saw Jian coming towards her with more medication, she frowned unhappily. Her expression was filled with despise and reluctance. Jian took in her little expression and felt his heart ache a little, but her body would not get better if she did not take her medicines. Although he really did not mind whether they had children or not, he also wanted her to be in better health, so that they could continue to be together for a long time. Tomorrow we'll ask Tom if he has any other alternatives to these. Jian walked to the bed and sat down. He took a tablet and fed it to Dawn as he said, Be good, my madam, you won't feel so cold after you eat this. He looked at her affectionately. I don't care about children, but I care about you, and how you're riddled with pain every month. He was quick to express his thoughts, so she would not think that he was merely doing it so they could have children, nipping misunderstandings in the bud there and then. Dawn's eyes flashed and her eyes were filled with emotions. This man was really meticulously considerate. He cared for her feelings and he took care of her body. It seemed like all the tribulations and gloom she had been wiped away after she had met this man. He was always a beam of light for her. In fact, he did not know that he was the most dazzling light in her heart, chasing away all the darkness in her life and completing where she lacked. Dawn looked at him and smiled. Her smile was innocent and sweet. Don't have to bother Dr. Tom. Dawn smiled and took the rest of the medicine from Jeon's hand and swallowed it all in one go. And, it's done. He. Dawn grinned at him like a silly goat. He knew that she did not want him to worry, so he shook his head tenderly and touched her little face with a smile and muttered, Silly Billy. The two shared a look and a smile. One was innocent and naive. The other was blissfully at peace. The drama Dawn was watching was a typical chick flick. Jeon wanted to put his arms around her and lean against the head of the bed together, but Dawn did not want to. He had to lie flat and with added pillows behind his back, while Dawn nestled next to him and nestled between his arms, eating snacks and giggling as she watched her show. When she saw the male main character, she had stars in her eyes, and she could not help but blurted, He's so handsome. The female main character's so lucky. Ah. Before Dawn could finish, she suddenly felt a heavy weight on her neck as a force clasped down on her neck and pressed her down. When she looked down, Jan's jealous and sullen face filled her line of vision. Your man was merely shot, he ain't dead yet. How dare you pine for other men in front of me? Look at your eyes. Jeon furiously enunciated every word. Jeon looked at her starry eyes and was consumed with rage instantly. He had never looked at her like this before. It seemed like if she could sew her mouth shut, she would. She's lucky. Is he even that good? His eyes are so small though. Jeon complained about the male protagonist in disgust. That is called double eyelids, okay? How is that small? Ah. Dawn defended the male main character. His eyes were indeed not small ones, but before she could finish speaking, the force on her neck increased abruptly and it was pressing her down once again, until her nose touched the tip of Jeon's nose while she heard him spit through gritted teeth. Say that again. His eyes were clearly clouded with emotions. Dawn immediately changed her words as her desire for survival surged. Very, very small. Not as big as yours. Yours looks the best. Dawn's rosebud-like mouth was slammed shut with a kiss and she could not speak anymore. Considering that he was injured, she did not want him to mess around, but she did not dare to push him away. In desperation, she bit him on his lip in an attempt to stop him. The faint smell of blood spread in their mouths instantly. She even saw his eyes grow gradually scarlet with lust. When Jeon finally let go of her, he raised his hand and touched the part of his lips where she had bitten. His bloodshot eyes were glaringly red as he called out to her with a soul-stirring smile. Donnie. His voice seemed to be able to penetrate her heart, and it was so low it vibrated deep within her bones, and it pulled her heartstrings. All it took was one word to make Dawn tingle all over, causing her to retreat in a panic as she held a pillow between the two of them while looking at him vigilantly. She sputtered. You've gotta behave. Dr. Tom said you've gotta behave. You can't do as you please. Jeon looked at her innocent yet uneasily blinking eyes and thought her helpless look was pretty cute. He got up abruptly to inch towards her. Stay away. Dawn's heart sank with fright, and she hurriedly moved back as she covered her face with the pillow. Chapter 39. You're too skinny, your itty-bitty waist is too fragile. Jeon grinned, removed the pillow covering Dawn's face, and stared at her meaningfully. Then you've got to take advantage of the time when I can't mess around and take good care of your health, my madam, otherwise your itty-bitty fragile waist might break. Dawn's heart raced as she heard what he said, and she was suddenly reminded of the time she had begged him amorously for mercy many nights ago. His reply: "You are too thin, you've gotta start taking good care of your body." All the memories resurfaced in Dawn's mind uncontrollably, causing her to blush extensively. "My madam, what are you thinking about?" Jian looked at her red-hot face slyly and snaked his hands unexpectedly around her waist. "I'm not thinking about anything." Dawn pushed his hand away like she was electrocuted, got out of bed in a panic, and ran to the bathroom. "I'm going to wash my hands." Jian could read people well, and with one look, he knew that she was thinking about it just now. Seeing how she ran away like she was fleeing, he laughed gloatingly, as if he liked seeing her flap around helplessly and startled in front of him. After returning from the bathroom, Dawn did not feel like watching TV anymore, so she went to her school bag, took out a book, and started reading. Jian was by her side, accompanying her and watching over her. When she had encountered difficult problems that she could not solve, he would easily answer them for her. Dawn was astonished. She had always thought that Jian was the kind of existence that was ferocious, despicable, and ruthless, and settled all his businesses with violence. In her heart, he was a reckless barbarian, just like the king of the jungle in ancient times, but he turned out to be so knowledgeable and was proficient in many things. These paradoxical contrasts stunned her deep down. "You are amazing." Dawn was so excited she could not help but plant a kiss on his handsome face as she blurted that out with a beaming smile. Jian swore that he was with her solemnly as she was reading, and had no intentions of teasing her. When she kissed him, he froze. Then, he raised his eyebrows and looked at her intently with blazing eyes as if he was about to eat her on the spot. Dawn's heart trembled as if she realized something and tried to hurriedly change the subject as she regretted what she did. She pointed to a difficult question in the book and said hastily, "There is still this and this questions. Don't interrupt me, okay?" "Am I interrupting you or are you interrupting me?" Jian quietly snaked his hand around her waist and whispered coyly, "I'm amazing." "Well, these are 2 words that I like to hear." As soon as he was done, he laughed more presumptuously and enticingly, luring people in with just a smile. Dawn thought this man was the bane of her existence. Restraining the ripples in her heart, she fell asleep before she knew it after reading for a while more. She already felt a little sleepy a long time ago. Since the day when Jian was shot and she was trapped in the mountains up till now, she had not had a good rest. Now that Jian was conscious, she wanted to be by his side as much as she could, so she has powered through the overwhelming drowsiness up till now when she had finally drifted off to sleep. Jian took the book from her arms and covered her with the quilt as he watched her fall asleep, but he could not sleep. He looked quietly at the sleeping beauty and his arms frowned, ran his fingers over her face, and whispered, "Donnie, don't run away ever again, you've gotta be good, you've gotta be good." Up till now, he was still worried that she would leave him again when his injury healed. It seemed that there was turmoil in his heart, that even though she was sleeping by his side at that moment and was within his line of sight, he was still worried that it would all have been just an illusion. Don't. Jian, no." "Ah." Dawn jolted up from her sleep with cold sweat beading on her forehead. All Dawn was seeing was Jian's worried face. "What's the matter, baby? Did you have a nightmare?" Jian hurriedly turned over to pull her into his arms, completely forgetting that he was still injured, patted her on the back, and assured her, "Don't be afraid, hubby is here, I'm right here." Sob. Dawn's brain was still foggy since she has just woken up from her dream. All she remembered was the horrific scene in her dreams. "I dreamed that you were shot. There was a lot of blood, so much blood. You ignored me. I called out to you but you ignored me." Sob. "Why would I ignore you? Don't be afraid, I'll always be by your side." "Blood, your wound's busted open." Dawn was tightly hugged by Jian, and the pungent smell of blood from his wound woke Dawn up in an instant and she left from his arms in panic. I'm sorry, it's my bad for touching your wound, don't move." While she was speaking, Dawn had already gotten out of bed and ran to get the first aid kit, but the wound looked gruesomely bloody, so she called Tom gently while she retrieved the first aid kit. "Donnie, don't worry, I'm fine." Jian could not bear to see Dawn's panicked expression and quickly comforted her. "It looks like this, and you say you're okay?" Dawn's eyes were red-rimmed. She rebuked him angrily. "Shut up, stop talking." Jian. To her amazement, he really did not talk anymore after that and obediently allowed her to deal with the bloodstains. Tom rushed to Regal almost as soon as he received the call, and when he had arrived, Dawn was still disinfecting the wound. "Jian, can you just f***ing behave?" As soon as Tom entered the door, he began scolding Jian. "What did I say? Don't move about, behave yourself. This is a gunshot wound, a wound that nearly took your life." "Ha, still fooling around, huh?" Tom quickly stopped the bleeding as he yelled at Jian, did an urgent body check on him, and continued to his yelling. "If you can't behave, I will take Dawn away and only send her back here when you're fully healed. Don't worry, I will guarantee her safety and will take care of her well. You're just not allowed to see her. FQ, as long as you're with her, you can't control your bestiality. Can you please just acknowledge the severity of your gunshot wound?" At the sight, Dawn was so embarrassed as she heard what Tom had to say. She just wanted to explain to Tom that Jian was like this only because she had her nightmares, but before she could speak, she heard Tom continue to berate. "I'm warning you, if the wound busts open again, I will take Dawn away immediately." Tom glared viciously at Jian, who had been silent for a long time, and barked angrily. "Why, are you mute now? Are you feeling sorry for yourself right now? Where's this thought process just now, huh?" After glancing at him with a stormy face, Jian turned to Dawn and asked carelessly, "My madam, can I speak now?" "Huh?" Dawn was dumbfounded. She had completely forgotten she told him to shut up when she was furious just now, looked at Tom gently embarrassedly, and snapped at Jian. "Who cares if you talk or not?" Really, as if she was so mean that she wanted to control whether he spoke or not. Jian, who had just gotten his approval, immediately glared at Tom with icy eyes, chuckled humorlessly, grabbed his collar, and pulled him down so he was eye level with him, and spat, "If you dare to take her away, I will send you to hell." Chapter 40. What's so shameless about me kissing my woman? "Huh, are you really sending me to hell with you looking like this?" Tom gently rolled his eyes at him angrily. "You've got to take good care of your health then, or you'll be the one that will go to hell." If it were not for the fact that he was injured right now, Tom really wanted to do a round of military-style boxing on Jian, who was annoyingly worrying. "You want to give it a try?" Jian barked coldly. Tom was taking his body temperature and was taken aback when he saw Jian's temperature. He instantly glared daggers at Jian and said, "You have a high fever of 40 degrees, can you stop with your bickering? Dawn, go to the medical box over there and get me the medicinal alcohol, hurry up." Tom hurriedly turned his head to Dawn and ordered, "Okay." Dawn turned around to get it in a hurry. Throughout the entire treating process, Tom was scolding Jian, and Jian was in a rare good mood as he allowed it to happen without any retorting from his side. Tom had a solemn look on his face. This was the worst time to sport a fever since it could mean that there was infection and complications. Dawn was terrified that there would be another accident, so she begged Tom to stay with them at home for the next few days, which was Tom's plan exactly. "I tell you, if you move about again, I won't even visit your grave after you die." Tom left Jian with this sentence and made his way to the guest room to rest. Jian burned with a high fever for 2 days, and Dawn was worried to death. She did not sleep at all the entire time, and finally when the fever subsided, Dawn could finally go to sleep. "In the future, I will cherish my life. I'll live well for you." Jian looked down at Dawn, who was asleep, with guilt in his eyes. He was in the wrong. The past few days, he was very distressed to see her lose her appetite and her sleep over him, and deeply regretted his actions in the mountains. Yes, how could he force her hand with his life? However, at that time, as he was watching her leaving, His brain was completely hijacked by his impulses. The only last trace of rationality was that he could not find peace in the thoughts of asking anyone that could possibly take care of her. As the result of the battle between his impulse and rationality, he allowed his gun to miss its target. At that time, he thought that perhaps only such an extreme move would make her stay. In this world, you may be willing to die for many, but Jian was willing to only live for Dawn alone. After all, to live would require more courage than death, does it not? This was my first time liking someone, so I'd want to desperately keep you by my side. Donnie, I'll rectify all my shortcomings, so you would stay, and you would be happy. For the rest of your life, please bear with me. In the period of time after that, Jian had really behaved a lot better. He was recuperating well, took his medicine on time, and followed Dawn's every order to the T. Jian's physical fitness was indeed commendable. He was like Superman since it only took about 10 days for his wound to heal. Since Dawn did not go to school and she did not want her studies to be affected, Jian had become her private tutor during this time. She had even registered an account and posted a blog post during this time, which made it onto Time magazine. Although it was an article about love, it garnered the praises of Enzo and Grandpa Time to traditional-minded literati. Dawn wanted to tell them that it was her work, but she thought the time was not right yet. Jian also saw the article, especially the last paragraph, but no one could tell that it was a poem with a hidden message. I watched time fly by in a flutter, just like love, whose wings were wide and free. You asked if I have seen my wings widespread. Ginormous, it was, majestic, it shall be. Mostly because it's all your love for me. The hidden message was, I love you, Jin Mose. Even though Dawn was not in school, she did not want to miss the school exam, so she took the time to go to the school just to take the exam. Dawn was very happy when she had gotten her exam transcript, just like a child who had gotten the candy she wanted. Her happiness was overwhelming. Jian, look. Dawn ran to the study joyfully to show her results to Jian, who was working in the study. It had been almost a month, and his wounds were nicely healed, and he was practically fine. He thought Sean and Jean would have handled all the company's affairs perfectly, but they still left him with a lot of tricky projects that required him to make decisions. Because of everyone's worries, Jian moved his working space to study at home. What's making you so happy? Jian grabbed a hold of Dawn, who was leaping with joy in front of him, and with a strong hand, caused Dawn to fall onto his lanky legs. At the same time, he caressed her waist with a big hand and pinched her blushing face with the other hand. Jian had still yet to recover from his past injury and she wanted to hurriedly get up, afraid that she was hurting him, but as soon as she moved, he pressed her back down once again. Your injury, you can't do this. Dawn warned him. Stop saying this. This was a sentence Jian had heard from her the most recently, and it was driving him up the wall. He buried his head in the crook of her neck intimately, and his hot breath that had spread from her neck to every cell of her body that was clamoring with restlessness. He nibbled on her earlobes and whispered in a low voice. What do you want me to see? The last sliver of reason reminded him what she had shouted when she entered the door. Dawn was uncomfortable and wanted to try to push him away. After hearing what he had asked, it was as if she had grabbed a lifeline. I went to school for the exam 2 days ago, right? I've just gotten the results today, and I've gotten first place in one of the subjects. Am I great or what? Dawn tried to change the subject and even took out her phone to show him the transcript, but Jian seemed to be nonchalant. Of course my girl's the best. Jian replied casually, but the movements of his hands and mouth looked excited. Dawn was itching all over, and complained angrily. Are you actually listening to me, Jian? Let me go. She was annoyed. She came back and came to the study all way excitedly to share this news with him, and this was how he responded. Hearing the complaint in her voice, Jian released her slightly, looked into her eyes, and smiled at her endearingly. I listen intently to everything you say. Dawn's delicate and bright face was puffed up in annoyance. You obviously didn't listen to me just now, since your focus was on. As Dawn spoke, she realized that she might have said something wrong. Was she about to say that Jian was focused on teasing her? Dawn interrupted that thought hastily right after it had appeared. However, Jian's smile deepened as he asked her, "What was I focused on?" "Jian, you?" Dawn screeched coquettishly and threw a shameless at him. "What's so shameless about me kissing my own woman?" Jian narrowed his eyes at her, his tone was sullen. Dawn looked at the storm of emotions in his eyes and was terrified, especially when they have physical contact. She hurriedly changed the subject before he could say anything more and exclaimed, "Say, I've gotten first place in one of the subjects. Even though I didn't get first place overall, I was still first in one of the subjects. Do you think father would have a change in impression towards me?" Dawn asked gleefully as she tried to convince herself. "I think he will, and I will work harder after that too." "Is your father the only person you think about?" Jian raised her eyebrows and asked, "Shouldn't you also think about me?" Dawn was puzzled. "I would never do business at a loss. I have been your exclusive tutor throughout recent days, so should I be rewarded for you being the first in your exam?" Jian added solemnly. "Private tutors are very expensive, you know." Chapter 41, Jian, all you do is bully me. "So, what do you want in return?" Dawn looked at him anxiously and asked, "Firstly, do you think this is a reasonable request? Should you even give me something in return? I should be the one to choose a reward that I'm satisfied with, right?" Jian was slowly luring her into the trap he had laid out. "I guess so." Dawn nodded her head blankly as if he was being very reasonable, but his eyes gave her an ominous feeling. In order to make sure her premonition does not come true, Dawn hurriedly offered a reward and stuttered. The gifts you've given my family when you married me are still untouched, so if I give them all to you, that should be enough, right?" Fortunately, Enzo had mentioned at that time that he would leave it all to her in case she needed it in the future. "I don't need money." His voice was husky as his hands trailed along her waist. "I need you." Without giving her the slightest chance to react, he sealed her ruby-red lips immediately, and Dawn was so startled that her pupils quivered. She wanted to push him away. "Do not move, I still have injuries on my body," Jian said slyly. For Jian, the days felt like months in the past month. There she was, lying next to him, tempting him, seducing him blatantly, but he was told to hold his desires in day after day. Jian. Dawn was really worried about his wound, so she stretched out her small hand to push him anxiously. "Dawnie, I miss you. I miss you very much." She heard him whispering softly in her ear. "It will aggravate your wound, Jian. No, you can't be like this. Then don't push me. Be good and the wound will be fine." Jian deliberately scared her. "If you push me again, the wound will really bust open." Dawn was terror-stricken. She was worried about his injury, but could not resist too much. Just as her emotions were paddling back and forth, Jian was as carefree as a fish in water. "You are unreasonable," Dawn complained. Under the warm white light, he smiled as he said, "How can I find it in my heart to bully you?" In the end, she fell asleep in his arms as she grumbled and complained. After Dawn fell asleep, Jian put his coat on her and carried her back to the bedroom so she could sleep better. "What's wrong with her? Is she sick?" Tom Jinli, who Jian had met when he came out of the study, was startled when he saw Dawn, who had passed out in Jian's arms. Jian threw him a faint glance and muttered two words. "She's tired." "Tired?" Tom did not react for a while, but when he looked at the faintly unsatisfactory look in Jian's eyes, he suddenly understood and exploded once again. "Are you an animal, Jian? Your wounds." Before he could finish speaking, Jian narrowed his eyes, gave him an eerie smile, and said, "Wait for me in the study. I have something to tell you about my injury." Tom did not think much about it as he turned to the study and waited there. Jian put Dawn on the bed, covered her with a blanket, adjusted the room temperature to the one that was the best for her, and closed all the curtains so she can sleep quietly. Back in the study, Tom Jinli was sitting in Jian's chair with his legs resting lazily on the desk. Jian walked over and kicked his legs off the table. In the next second, Jian yanked him out of the chair and pressed him on the table, face down, and cursed. Tom Jinli, if you dare to mention my injury again, I promise you, you will regret it. Let me go. Tom struggled to get up, but Jian was so strong. He was even pinching the tendons of Tom's wrist, causing him to not be able to exert his full strength, but Tom's mouth was unforgiving. Your injury is fully healed yet, besides, in this broad daylight. You be-starred. I can't do strenuous exercises. Jian glared at him, his eyes full of warning. Why don't you try me now, and see if I can do strenuous exercises? You are such a pervert. Naturally, Tom understood the ferocious underlying meaning in Jian's words and immediately cursed. I'm straight. Don't even think about it. Then shut the F up. If you dare to mention my injury in front of Dawn again, I will f***ing end you. Jian cursed angrily. I know my condition very well. It was all because of Tom running his mouth about his injuries from time to time that made Dawn resist his touches very much. That was torture to Jian. Jian, you be-starred. Tom Jinli yelled. Let me go. Jian had finally let go of him in disgust when he saw what was unfolding and glared at him with a warning in his eyes. Then, he straightened himself up, and only then did he think of asking him. What are you here for? I just came to see if you are dead or not. Tom spat angrily. After all, I haven't been here for a week, so let's see how your wound is doing. All thanks to you, it's doing great. Jian said carelessly. Take off your clothes, let me take a look at it. Tom stepped forward, trying to take Jian's clothes off. Jian immediately took a step back, glanced at him, and said solemnly, I'm fine, don't bother. Truth to be told, after the exercise with Dawn, his wound was a little affected, a little painful, and it had not completely healed, but it was not a big deal. He knew his body well. After all, he had always had injuries in the previous years, so right now, he was somewhat resistant to Tom's examination. As expected, Tom was no match for Jian. After several fruitless attempts, Tom snarled viciously and said, Let me know when you die next time. Those may be angry words, but Jian was not upset about it. Chapter 42, I think I'm starting to fall for you. These past few days, in order to take care of Jian and prepare for the exam, Dawn had not had a good night's rest for a long time. Also, it has been a long while since she last experienced a strong and lasting love. Physically and mentally exhausted, she slept from noon to night. Jian was applying ointment on himself by using a mirror in the bathroom. There were some small tears on the wound. Before this, he would disregard the need to apply any ointment on his wound, but now, if he could take an elixir to restore the wound to its original state quickly, he would, so that his little woman would not worry. Ah! Suddenly a cry of pain rang, and he knew right away it came from Dawn and rushed out of the bathroom in an instant. Why are you sleeping on the ground? Jian walked over quickly and picked up Dawn from the ground, put her back on the bed, frowned slightly. How did she end up on the floor? Dawn did not seem to be fully awake yet she put her arms around his neck and answered hesitantly. I wanted to get out of bed, but my legs gave way and I fell. Jian looked at Dawn's droopy head, which was like a wilted plant, and her adorable messy hair. Especially when she said that her legs gave way, the corners of his mouth raised unconsciously. He said to her endearingly, What did you want to do? Tell me. If you need anything, just call out to hubby. Why do you still need to do it yourself? I want to go to the toilet. Dawn hugged him tighter in a daze and said warily, You can carry me there. My legs feel like jelly and I can't walk. What did you say? Jian actually heard it clearly the first time, but his eyes were blank as he froze. He could not believe it, and he felt a little excited. This woman had finally stopped being wary of him and was readily willing to rely on him. Jian suddenly recalled that since he was injured, they have been joined at the hip day and night. It seems that his girl has completely opened her heart to him. She was no longer staying with him for the sake of her family, nor because she was afraid of him self-harming, let alone because she was cautious with him because she was afraid of him. He was suddenly reminded of the day she held his arm and said coquettishly, "Accompany me to watch a horror movie, please, the new one. I dare not watch it by myself, but I want to watch it." Since when did she slowly change? He did not know, but he knew that this moment was overwhelmingly exciting. "Okay," he said to her softly, picked her up, and walked to the bathroom. That okay was piercing yet charming. No one should be able to pull away from this voice. It was as if someone had tickled her heart repeatedly with a willow's branch, causing tingles to spread all over her body, causing her heart to constrict. Suddenly, she snapped back into reality. The haze in her eyes had dissipated, and it was just then they had arrived at the bathroom. "You can go out now." Dawn, who had returned to reality, was a little embarrassed and shy. After all, how could she act all cutesy about this kind of thing and ask him for help? Jian saw the flash of resistance in her eyes after she cleared her head. His excited heart was a little dampened at this moment, but he did not mind. As long as she was by his side, they have a lifetime more to go. After closing the door, Dawn's gaze stayed peeled on the door, as if she wanted to stare at the man outside the door through this closed door. Remembering the picture in her head, when she was brazenly coquettish with him just now, the man's eyes were full of joy. This man really gave her the most affectionate tenderness in the world. To her, he can be said to be meticulously caring and was willing to take care of everything under the sun for her. Everything she had asked for, he would deliver. Her sleep has always been bad since when she was a child. Usually, she would not dare to sleep too deeply because of fear. She would always jolt up in the middle of the night, but after meeting him, every time she woke up at midnight, he would hold her in his arms and reassure her softly, very patient and loving. Yes, every time. Even if she only moved her body slightly, he would wake up and look at her, and then whispered in her ear, "Donnie, sleep with peace in here. You don't have to be afraid of anything." After knowing that she has dysmenorrhea, he would prepare hot chocolate and a warm pad for her belly for her every time to prevent her from getting even the slightest bit of cold. As long as he was at home, her legs would practically be decorative since he carried her everywhere, with his eyes full of pampering love towards her. In order to make sure she stayed, he risked his life, even if it was very extreme. If he did not love her so deeply it penetrates the bones, who would put their life on the line just to prove it? Also, Dawn slowly discovered that she had started to relax with him. She would complain to him, but she would also be coquettish with him. She was no longer as afraid and as cautious of him as when she first met him in Regal, and she had even begun to enjoy everything he gave. He had once said, "I love you so much that it hurts." Shouldn't love be sweet? How could it be so painful? Perhaps it was because he did not get a response. After all, unrequited love felt more sad and painful when compared to mutual love. Dawn, who used to be afraid of Jian, did not dare to be completely open with him. Later, because of her bodily condition, she thought that leaving him was the best thing she could do for him to repay his kindness towards her. However, come to think of it, in love, self-righteous sacrifice was probably the scariest thing you could do in a relationship. After all, he needed you, but you wanted to deprive him of that one thing he needed and take away his life, all in the glorious facade of it was all for his good. Dawn, follow your heart, live freely, and just leave the rest to me then. I strongly believe, if there's a will, there's a way. Dawn's entire being brightened up and visibly relaxed all of a sudden. She allowed bad things and foul memories to flow away like the water when she washed her hands. Life was short, so it would be an amazing thing to have someone to pledge their loyalty to. Unknowingly, she stayed inside the bathroom for a long time. Jian was worried that something would happen to her when she was inside, so he waited at the door. Just as when he was going to knock on the door opened. Dawn looked up and saw Jian standing at the door. Oh. Phew, you gave me such a fright. Dawn was so immersed in her emotions she was a little startled when she opened the door. How are your legs? Jian asked softly and swept her off her feet. Dawn was wide awake at that moment, so she instinctively wanted to remind him of his wound, but after thinking about it, she felt that he would not listen, so she simply let him hold her and put her on the bed. Jian wanted to let her go, but she hugged him so tightly he could not get up. Jian was surprised but confused by that sudden move of hers. He frowned and asked tenderly, "What's the matter?" Dawn's little head rubbed up against his arms, then she raised her head to look at his slightly confused eyes. Their eyes met, and there were ripples of dazzling light in her eyes as she slowly said, "Jian, I think I'm starting to fall for you." Her eyes were full of stars, and they shone brightly. They dazzled, sparkled, and were filled with sincerity. This time, there was no trace of shyness at all. Jian was taken aback when he saw it. The hands on her waist tightened, and what Dawn said had strung the chord in the deepest end of his heart, causing the most beautiful sound to travel far and wide. Just when he was in his daze, his crescent-eyed girl smiled and kissed him gently on his lips. It was not a fleeting peck, but an emotion-fueled kiss. Jian's heart trembled fiercely. She had also taken the initiative to kiss him before, but those kisses were merely faint ones. Before this, she wanted to test and see if she could have children, so she was very shy and nervous as she took initiative to be intimate with him, but this time it was completely different as it felt like she wanted to give him all her heart, and as if to hang onto him for dear life as they freeze this moment in time forever. Chapter 43, Pulling Him in Like a Drug. Towards the end, Jian took over as lead from Dawn, since her kissing skills were still not as good. She was the one that took the initiative, but in the end, she was the one who could not continue it. Jian looked at her blushing face and as she gasped for breath. He curled his lips in a smile, continued her sentence, and chuckled. Just starting? I've gotta work harder then. I've gotta work harder to make you like me more, to make you fall deeper in love with me. He thought she would roll her eyes flirtatiously at him or complain in a low voice, but unexpectedly, after she calmed down, a sweet smile beamed on her face, and she said playfully, "You gotta do your best to work harder then." Her smile was so beautiful not even the moon and stars could compare. Her beautiful face was adorned by her loveliness, and under the warm light, she seemed to be basked in a layer of gentleness, making her look so demure it was pulling him in like a drug. I'll start right now then. Jian pushed her down onto the bed right away and loomed over her. Dawn watched him lower himself down over her and yelped frantically. Not now, Jian. She retorted with feigned anger when she could finally make a sound. When can I do that? Dawn tried to stay awake, knowing that however she answered, this question would still end up digging a grave for herself, so she simply did not answer, and said to him promptly, I'm hungry. Jian reluctantly stopped what he was doing. She went to bed before she had lunch, and she had just woken up from her nap. She really did have to eat first. What do you feel like eating? He propped himself up by putting his hands on both sides of her, looked down at her from above her, and asked her gently. Dawn bit her lip, gave it a very serious thought, and said to him, I want to eat tacos, the kind from the food truck by the road. Would you humble yourself to eat that kind of food with me, President Mose? Someone of Jian's status would usually disregard food trucks with disdain, but Dawn thought it was delicious. After being with Jian, he will take her to very high-end restaurants for meals all the time, but she was really missing the delicious food the roadside had to offer. Being with you wouldn't be considered as humbling myself. On the contrary, it's an honor. Jian touched the tip of her nose with his, and said seriously, I grew up eating street food too. The following sentence made Dawn feel a pinch in her heart. Yes, his childhood was also as dark. In comparison, apart from Shabaneve and Sheena, she had still met many people who were curative to her life, so he seemed even more miserable by comparison. It must be very hard and tortuous for him to bear the feeling of emptiness and longing for her. However, he did not mention any of that. He only cared for her physical and mental well-being wholeheartedly, pulling her out from the darkness into the sweet, warm light. Dawn looked at him, felt her heart enveloped with warmth. How lucky she must be to have met such a man. The two changed their clothes, and Jian drove her to the food truck of her choice. The weather in November was already starting to get a little cold, so Jian thoughtfully brought a thin blanket and more clothes along to be kept in the car. This was the first time Dawn had been in a car driven by Jian himself. Usually, it was driven by either Sean or the driver. Dawn sat in the passenger seat and turned her head to look at him from time to time, smirking. At that moment, it felt like the first date for a man and a woman who had just entered a relationship. Jian was also in a good mood. His slender fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel. While waiting for the red light to turn green, he quickly pulled Dawn over and kissed her fiercely. The bustling traffic all around them had Dawn's eyes widened in fright, and he chuckled and asked, "What have you been smirking about?" The light had turned green and the car started moving again. Dawn was gasping for air as she glared at him. "Can you pay attention to your surroundings? There are so many cars around here. The red light takes a full minute to turn green. What a waste of time if we were to merely just wait." Dawn. Inexplicably, he actually made sense. "What were you giggling about just now?" Jian asked again casually. "It's nothing. It's my first time seeing you driving, and it's just the two of us. It feels so good." Dawn smiled sweetly at him. "You look so good when you drive." It was already nighttime, and the shining stars filled the skies. Colorful neon lights shone in through the windows along the way, illuminating his face, shrouding his handsome features with a blanket of fairy-like temperament, attracting stares from people around him. "My driving skills are pretty good too, right?" Jian smirked intently. "Yeah," Dawn replied innocently. However, as soon as she finished speaking, Jian's face was suddenly really close to her ear, and he smiled coyly. "Is it as good as the others?" Dawn's ears flushed red all of a sudden. She stiffened, then stretched out her hand to give him a whack as she feigned anger. "You're so shameless, Jian. Could you save yourself some dignity?" "Why do I need dignity when I have you?" This woman, her every smile and crinkle of her eyes would allure him to no end, especially now that she had opened up her heart to him. An unintentional sentence said from time to time would greatly stroke his desire. Dawn looked at his ravenous eyes, unconsciously tugged her clothes around her tightly, and shrunk back into her seat cautiously, her small face bulging with annoyance as she barked. "Jian, you keep saying that you like me, but I feel like you just want me for my body. You are nasty." The car was parked safely at the side of the road. Jian quietly unbuttoned his seat belt, leaned forward and pressed him against her on the passenger seat and pulled her hiding little head shrinking back towards himself, and kissed her. This time, the kiss was lingering and gentle, and she heard him say, "I want your body, your heart, and everything about you. I want it all, I want it all." This man was always so full of surprises. Before she could recover from the sudden kiss, she had already fallen into his affectionate yet solemn eyes, which were like bottomless wells, as if she could see her whole life unfold before her when she looked into his eyes. "As long as it was you, I want it all." Perhaps, in this world, there would really be a kind of man who would only indulge one woman all his life, and she had already met hers. "We're here." When she came back to her senses, Jian had already unbuckled her seat belt for her, got out of the car, went around to her side, and opened the car door for her, while one of his hands was placed on the roof of the car in case she knocked her head. "Oh, okay." Dawn went out of the car in a daze. When she got out of the car, Jian held Dawn's hand tightly, and subconsciously glanced around. This was a habit he had developed before. Every time he went to a place, he would first scan the surroundings so that if there were to be an accident, he would not be caught off guard. However, even though it had been peaceful in the past few years, the habit was still there, especially with her by his side. He had to be extra careful. "Are you cold?" He touched her face with his other hand and asked softly. "Nope." Dawn had already smelled the enticing aroma of delicious food and pulled Jian straight ahead just to stop dead in her tracks after just a steps and looked back at Jian. Hum? Jian looked at the woman before him with a solemn expression on her face and raised his eyebrows questioningly. Chapter 44. Eat your food. Stop spewing nonsense. Dawn took a step closer to Jian and warned sullenly with a low voice that only the two of them could hear. Behave yourself and eat properly. Don't kiss me, don't tease me, and don't spew nonsense. She did not want to wait to be kissed by him in public, or to be flustered by his words, which would also be extremely embarrassing. Jian looked at her charming little face and tattling mouth and thought that she was adorable and that he would really like to kiss her, but he held himself back. Yes, my royal highness. Jian chuckled, lowered his head, and whispered in her ear. Don't worry, only I can see your demurely abashed appearance. You, forget it. Dawn compromised, turned around, and walked away, not wanting to pay any more attention to him. As soon as the two came near, a waiter came over to greet them warmly and showed them the menu. What would you like to eat? Jian handed the menu over to Dawn. Dawn was lured by the enticing aroma of food as soon as she got out of the car, so she could not wait. She ordered a fish taco, and then ordered more of her favorite food, and ended up overordering. It seems a little too much. Dawn muttered to herself. It's okay, if you can't finish it, we can pack it up for Blasty later. Jian replied. After ordering, the waiter came over to remove the menu and said to them enthusiastically. Okay, please wait a moment, delicious food will be here soon. As soon as they found a place to sit down, they had attracted a lot of attention. Men were looking at Dawn and women were looking at Jian, but before Dawn could notice it, Jian stopped their ogling with a stern glare that was beyond icy cold. The food will be here in a while, why the gloomy face? It's scary. Dawn glanced at Jian's gloomy face, thinking that he thought the food took too long to serve and that he did not have the patience to wait. It's fine. Jian replaced the gloom on his face with gentleness. He moved the chair where he had originally sat, which was in front of her, to be next to her as if he was marking his territory to everyone else that was present. The first thing that came up was the fish tacos, which looked delicious, but it was still very hot, so they had to wait for a while for it to cool. I'm going to look for a bathroom, you wait here. Dawn got up and said to Jian. I'll accompany you. Jian got up as well to accompany her. No, I know where things are over here, you can just watch me from here. Dawn explained. Otherwise, if you leave, our seat and our food would be taken away. When Jian arrived, he noticed that there was a public restroom not too far away, so he did as she wanted. He was squeezing the lime onto the tacos so she could eat it right away when she was back. Wiping his hands with a napkin, he raised his eyes to look in the direction of the bathroom from time to time. He had been squeezing limes with his hands. The limes were pretty acidic, so he did not want Dawn to have too much of it, but when he saw her longing eyes, he had decided to indulge her, so he did not dare to squeeze too much for fear that she would drown her tacos in it. Hey handsome, you here alone? Suddenly a female voice rang in Jian's ears, her tone was heavily laced with seduction. Would you mind if I sit here? Before Jian could answer, she had already taken the seat next to him. Unexpectedly, Jian raised his left hand to show the wedding ring on his ring finger and retorted. I mind? His voice was neither threatening nor angry. And, I'm married, please stay away. There was still some respect in his tone. Unfortunately, the woman did not seem to be willing to give up such a fine specimen, so she was persuasively persistent. You're married. Well then, don't you think that extramarital love packs more flavors, sir? An enchanting smile bloomed on the woman's face. Jian, who had not looked up at her, abruptly stopped what he was doing, looked up at her frowning with disgust and coldness in his eyes, but all the woman saw was him looking at her and thought that her opportunity was coming, so she amped up the charm in her smile. She was just about to put her hand on his shoulder when she heard him roar coldly. Ha! Don't insult me, don't tarnish my marriage, scram. His love was so beautiful, so pure, and his woman shone so brightly and was so full of glory. How dare others compare themselves to her? He initially wanted to leave her with some respect, seeing that she was a woman, but she was too daft and ignorant. The woman shuddered when Jian had thrown her a stern scram. The aloof coldness in his eyes caused her to retreat immediately, not wanting to linger for another second longer. She covered her face and ran away aggrieved. After running a little farther, she looked back again unwillingly and happened to see another girl beside him. Dawn, who had just come back from the restroom, saw everything that happened just now. The woman was wearing a pair of stiletto-heeled short boots and tight leather pants that showed off her slender legs. She donned a fur coat, had a head of wavy hair, and had exquisite facial features. She was a hottie, but Jian chased her away. Dawn's heart was very warm. The woman turned her head from a distance suddenly and just so happened to meet Dawn's eyes. Complicated emotions flashed in her eyes. That woman just now was just a passerby. Jian interrupted with a chuckle. Apart from her, he had no room in his heart for anyone else. Dawn had always said that she was a girl with defects, but in fact, he was the defective one, with a gaping hole in his heart that could only fit her. Eat up. Jian pushed the tacos and the squeezed limes in front of her, and said, "You can only eat these, no more." It was too acidic for her, he did not even want to give her that bit of lime. Dawn knew her body, so she did not refute it. She happily took the food from Jian and agreed with him. Food could always bring happiness to people, at least, that was the case for Dawn. Because of the delicious meal before her, her mood was unaffected by that woman, and she was very satisfied with her food. After all, she had not eaten these in a long time. When she was done eating, she felt a little bloated from her overeating. On the way back, Dawn felt uncomfortable sitting with her stomach bloated and bulging. Fortunately, Jian saw her discomfort and lowered her seat so that she would feel more comfortable lying down. Silly girl, no matter how delicious it was, don't force yourself if you can't finish it. Look at how uncomfortable you are right now. Jian frowned and looked worriedly at her. At that time, he did not even eat anything since he was busy preparing condiments for her. He probably should have shared some with her, so the silly girl would not stuff herself bloated with all that food. "I'm okay, I feel much better now." Dawn had really felt much better, compared with when she had just finished eating. After all, she pulled Jian along for a short walk for a while before getting into the car. "Jian, let me ask you something." Dawn sat up and stared at her man, who was driving. "Go ahead," Jian said. "I'll tell you everything I know. How many women did you have before me?" It had suddenly dawned on Dawn after that woman's incident tonight that the man before her was rich, powerful, influential, and good-looking. He would have often encountered scenes like today, right? Also, for him to be so skilled in certain areas, as he had a lot of practice in the past. Dawn thought to herself, if he really did have many women before her, would she mind? She pondered and realized she really did seem to mind a little. Forget it, everyone has their past, she should just stick to looking at the future. Chapter 45. Do you know what saving myself for you means? It just so happened, Jian stopped at a red light at that moment. His hand that was tapping on the steering wheel stopped as he turned to look at Dawn very seriously. He looked into her eyes and clearly enunciated each word. "No one else. It has always been only you." The sincerity and determination in his eyes were unabashedly displayed before her, striking a chord on her heartstrings as she fell deeper and deeper. Also, he was a sly old fox that was well versed in hiding his emotions from all the years he had been in the business world, so it should be easy for him to throw on a disguise. Besides, he really did not look like it was his first time. I don't believe it." Dawn became agitated when she thought of this. She had a feeling that he was lying to her. "Why won't you believe it?" The light turned green. Jian continued driving the car as he stole glances at Dawn and looked at the road ahead. This woman did not believe him. You... Dawn hesitated. She did not know how to phrase her thoughts properly. She could not just blab something like "you're too good at that, so it doesn't seem like it's your first time, right?" So, all she could do was find excuses and hope that he would let it slide. Anyway, I just don't believe it. It's a woman's intuition. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Jian panicked a little, thinking that he did not explain well enough, which caused her to misunderstand. He hurriedly explained. Since I met you 10 years ago, I have been saving myself for you until now, and I have not had anyone else, be it in my heart or physically. You're like that, and you claim to have saved yourself for me? Dawn continued to speak, albeit dissatisfied and a little excited as she blurted out. As far as your proficiency is concerned, if you didn't have 100 women before me, you'd have at least 99 of them? How audacious of you to claim that you've saved yourself for me? Do you even know what that means? When Jian heard this, the uneasiness in his heart was instantly swept away, and there was even a little smile that was tugging at the corner of his mouth. She was complaining that he was too good at it? Why are you smirking? Dawn became even angrier when she saw him smirk. Did I just expose you? I knew you're not like what you claim to be. I'm at a loss. You're my only man, but I'm not your only, A pair of cool lips sealed Dawn's chattering mouth, abruptly, unavoidably. Initially, when Dawn said that she did not trust him, Jian had already changed his course. He was going to stop by an open space next to a small roadside park to explain things to her. He did not want her to hold grievances and misunderstandings in her heart, but before he could stop the car, he heard her say those next words. It was rare for her to throw a fit at him, even more so if it was caused by jealousy. She looked so cute with the agitated expression on her face, he just wanted to kiss her fiercely and eat her up. There is no one, it's always been only you. Unbuckling her seat belt, Jian buried his head between her neck and licked her earlobes. His voice went hoarse. It had been you, it has been you, and it will still only be you in the future. There is only Dawn in Jian's life, and he wants no one else but Dawn, for the rest of his life. Everything I did with you was instinctual. I've had no practice prior to this. My woman is too attractive, and I happen to be. His hand has quietly sneaked up her clothes, and he curled his lips and chuckled. Talented. Jian, you. Dawn was almost defeated by him in the first half of his sentence, but when he smiled, gave her a bad and weird feeling. Talented. Ha! This man was too shameless. Why are you so shameless? Dawn was ashamed and annoyed. How talented are you? How talented? Let's find out. Jian smiled, and Dawn realized that she had dug a hole for herself. Immediately, Jian pressed the button for the car windows, and instantly several tinted windows rose up, blocking all sight from the outside. He did not want what happened next to be seen by others. He was too strong, and if he insists on acting on it, she would have been no match for him. He knew her too well, and he could always draw her to sink into the seas of desire with him. Dawn had to admit, once this man had placed his everlasting love into action, no one would be able to resist him. After heaven knows how long, he finally released her. You? Dawn's body was sore all over, and her eyes were wet. She could not even form coherent sentences. Looking at her demure and fragile appearance, Jian chuckled with heartache and satisfaction as he held her hand and brought it to his heart. What's wrong? Am I just too talented? Shall I dial down on my talent the next time? Dawn glanced at him angrily, all her emotions were blazing in her eyes. Then, she closed her eyes and ignored him. Knowing that her petite body needed rest, he watched her close her eyes, and covered her with the blanket. He lowered his head, kissed her on the forehead, and said, Take a nap, I'll let you know when we're home. Watching him restart the car, Dawn secretly pulled the blanket up to her nose, revealing only her two eyes. It was still a little damp. In fact, she was a little shy just now. She was used to falling asleep most of the time after the deed, but now he deliberately released her from his embrace and kept her awake. It was this trace of sobriety that made her shy. In the past, she did not dare to reject him when they did it, as if it was just a routine, and since she was married to him, she had this obligation to satisfy him. Just now, she realized that she had willingly done it with him. Even if she resisted at the beginning, she was merely afraid that he would go too far. Dawn's brain began to blank out. When did it start? She was no longer afraid of him, except on certain things. When she glanced at the person driving next to her and how he just seemed like nothing was out of the ordinary, sometimes she would wonder, what did this man feed on while he grew up? Iron and steel? Jian drove faster than when they had left the house. He was worried that she felt uncomfortable sleeping in the car, so he sped up. Sir is back. When they arrived at Regal, the guard stepped forward to greet Jian. Jian got out of the car, walked to Dawn's side to open the car door for her so he could carry her directly, and then told the guards, "Get the car washed tomorrow." "No way." Dawn hurriedly stopped Jian when she heard it. She pursed her lips and looked at Jian, her face full of embarrassment. "Don't let others get in the car, I'll take care of it tomorrow." Jian did not catch her drift for a while. Dawn shook her legs angrily, glanced at the guards and then at Jian, and finally hid her head in his arms without knowing how to spell it out to him. "Just don't let anyone else get to the car, there?" After looking at the shy little woman in his arms, Jian had finally understood her underlying message. The corners of his mouth raised unconsciously when he finally understood she was worried that what happened near the park would be discovered. "Don't touch this car, leave it here." Then, Jian carried Dawn back to their room. The first thing Dawn did when she returned to the room was to take a bath. She had a refreshing time and had a good dream that night. When she woke up the next morning, she found Jian was washing the car by himself. Then, he sent her to school. Jian's car stopped at the entrance of the school. Dawn opened the car door and got out of the car. When she was about to close the car door, someone stopped her. Chapter 46. "Jian, you're yelling at me. Do you want me to walk you in?" Jian stretched out his hand from the driver's seat to block the car door that was about to close. His voice was a little suppressed and a little sheepish, like a child looking forward to doing their first errand. "It's fine, I can walk in myself." Dawn almost immediately rejected him without thinking twice. However, as she said it, she noticed the forbearance in Jian's eyes and realized that something seemed to be wrong. She was about to justify herself when he suddenly smiled at her and said, "Okay then. Call me if anything happens." Jian closed the car door right away, not wanting for her to feel bad, but there was a flash of emptiness in his eyes. He already knew the results, but he still wanted to give it a try. Otherwise, why would he remain seated in the car without even unbuttoning his seat belt as she opened her own car door? Dawn stood still for several seconds, then slowly turned around and walked towards the school. After walking a few steps, she turned back silently and found that Jian had not left yet. He looked at her through the car window and even gave her a reassuring smile, and it made Dawn feel guilty. She just refused him without second thoughts, as if she had directly denied his existence, as if the "I like you" that she said the previous night was all for show. The moment she closed the door, she saw the loneliness in his eyes, and it continued to linger in her mind for a long time. Just as Jian was about to start the car, he received a call from Sean. "Sir Mose, I found a post on the forum of State College in the morning. I've sent you a screenshot. It's about the little madam. The post has been removed by our hackers, and the IP address of the original post have also been found. The information of the person who posted it has been sent to you. We've cleaned up the forum. Fortunately, we found out about the post relatively early, so it hasn't caused any havoc yet. Please let me know how you want to deal with it," Sean said with a serious tone. Since Dawn went to school here and would continue to be here for at least 4 years until she graduates, Jian thought about funding the school with some supplies, and because of that, Sean was in charge of school-related affairs. So, he managed to find out about and delete the post in time this morning. When he hung up the phone, Jian was in a very bad mood, as if he was always easily irritable when it came to all things Dawn. Looking through what Sean had sent him, the displeasure on his face could not be worse than it was at that moment. He pursed his lips menacingly and dialed the phone number Sean had found. Everything about the post was about discrediting Dawn. He could probably guess that it was the work of the woman who struck up a conversation with him last night. There were clear photos of him and Dawn in the post, with a general direction to discredit Dawn for being a sugar baby, but was still a lowly scum that could not be accepted in polite society. She was only worthy of eating food trucks with her sugar daddy. Because of her health condition, Dawn was not allowed to put too many limes on her tacos, but the words in the post were all about her sugar daddy disliking her for ugly eating habits and refusing to even serve her condiments. The entire post was filled with descriptions about how pathetic Dawn was. The word pathetic pierced painfully into Jeon's eyes like a thorn. How dare others slander against the apple of his eye like that? Hello, is it Lindsay J? The phone call went through. Jeon's cold voice rang. Who are you? Lindsay was startled by the coldness in the voice on the other side of the phone. You don't need to know who I am. All you need to know now is, the woman you slandered on the state college forum isn't someone the means of you can insult. If you dare insult her again or cause her to be sad with any of your words and deeds, I will make sure you suffer for the rest of your life. Jeon said slowly, his voice full of menace as he raised his eyebrows angrily and barked. Clear? Can't you just be nicer when you're talking to girls? You're so. I have no distinction between men and women right here. Only my people, and those who are not. Jeon interrupted her impatiently. You'd better behave. I'm not the kind to joke around. Jeon hung up the phone immediately after he finished his sentence. Lindsay on the other side of the phone was paralyzed with fright as she slumped onto the ground, unable to move for a long time. It was as if this voice was right by her side, menacing and cold, like it could kill her at any given time. No, it will make her live a life that was worse than death at any given time. After Jeon hung up the phone, he called Dawn immediately. Although Sean said that he found out about the post in time, and no one had retweeted that post, he was still worried that someone would have seen it and spread rumors that would make his woman sad if they were to reach Dawn's ears. When Dawn's call went through, he hurriedly asked, Are you in the classroom yet? I was just walking by our classroom's building and was about to go upstairs. Dawn asked. What's the matter? They had just separated and here he was, calling her immediately. Jeon did not answer her directly, but asked her rhetorically. Have you encountered anything bad along the way? Or anything that affected your mood? He did not want to speak to directly so she would not be troubled, so he merely hinted. Dawn thought about Jeon's question seriously after she had heard it, but there was none. After all, she had not been to school for many days, and she was not acquainted with many people. Other than Sheena who would pick fights with her, she had nearly zero interaction with the rest of her classmates. None. Dawn frowned and asked rhetorically. Is something wrong? No. Jeon replied immediately. If you encounter anything unusual, call me right away, okay? Dawn felt like he was hiding something from her. He used to call and text her when she went to school, but he never called as soon as they separated and asked her strange questions like these. Dawn pondered and did not realize she had forgotten to answer Jeon until she heard his urgent cry from over the phone. Did you hear me? Oh, yes, I heard you. As if she was distracted in class and was caught on the spot by the teacher, Dawn was startled and replied in a panic. If I find out that you have suffered any grievances and you hid them from me, then hide in a corner to secretly cry your eyes out. I swear, I will kill you. Jeon practically finished his sentence with a tone that was so laced with malice, since he was deathly afraid that she would keep things from him. Jeon. Dawn exploded. Why are you yelling at me? Also, why would you want to kill me? Domestic violence, huh? Dawn's face indicated that she could not wait to crawl into the phone and beat him up. He even sent out his swearing. Jeon was amused by her phrase domestic violence and deliberately held back his smile and continued coldly. How could I bear the thought of killing you? I'd kill myself first before I would even consider hurting you. However, I have my own ways of punishing you. Ring. The class bell rang at the most inconvenient time. I gotta go, I need to get to class." Dawn was startled, hung up the phone quickly, and ran to the classroom. Jian looked at his phone, smiled, and repeated what Dawn had just said. Domestic violence. Wow, only she could coin up with terms like this. He shook his head helplessly yet lovingly. He quickly sent Sean another text, send someone to guard the school closely, but not too closely, just as long as she's safe without interfering with her freedom. Chapter 47, Your boyfriend must love you a lot. Sean was in a daze when he saw Jian's message. He stared speechless at his phone screen for several seconds. How could he make sure she has freedom yet at the same time ensure her safety? Can these two terms even be in the same sentence? Dawn did not go to school for the aptitude exam because of Jian's injury. At that time, since she had agreed for seat arrangement to be based on grades, so she was seated at the back of the class because she was absent for the exam. To her, since she could hear what the teacher said, as long as she could see what was on the blackboard, it did not matter much to her. However, what she did not expect was that Jane Smith would be her tablemate, who was number 1 in the entire year. Dawn thought that even if she took the exam without studying, she would not end up in the same row as herself. The weather in November this year was getting really cold. In the morning, Jian deliberately prepared warm packs for her stomach and gave her an additional warm little vest to wear to school, but Jane only wore a thin coat. Jane has been lying on the table face down, with her body twitching since Dawn entered the classroom. She was clearly crying. Dawn paused and wanted to comfort her, but after thinking twice about it, she suppressed the urge to talk to Jane. After all, everyone in this class did not seem to like her very much, so Dawn did not want to garner unwanted attention to herself. Jane's head remained buried in her arms throughout the duration of the entire class. Dawn felt a little uneasy. If she was sick or if anything were to happen to her, she, as Jane's table mate, would be considered a helper of harm if she did not report to the teacher in time. Dawn bit her lip and decided to intervene. "Hey, are you okay?" Dawn patted her gently on the shoulder and asked softly. Dawn initially thought Jane would not pay attention to her, but she did not expect that as soon as she finished speaking, Jane would raise her head sobbing and cry out, "I may have to drop out of school, and I won't be able to go to school with you guys in the future." Dawn was taken aback when she looked at Jane. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face was full of sadness and helplessness, and her sleeves were wet with tears. Dawn was not a hard-hearted person, so when she saw Jane like this, her heart was filled with distress. "You have such good grades and you are a good student with excellent character. Why are you dropping out of school?" Dawn asked. Jane was the only one in the class who did not suck up to Sheena, and of course, she had not shown much enthusiasm for Dawn as well. There were times when all Dawn and herself wanted was just to study without having to be involved with anything else, so Dawn's impression of Jane was still pretty okay. Jane raised her head laboriously and looked at Dawn, tears still flowing. "My mother forbade me to continue. She said going to school is useless, it was a waste of money, and she said." Dawn watched as she struggled to speak, only then did she notice that Jane's face was burning red. Dawn hurriedly felt her forehead, and she was shocked. "You have a fever, high fever." Dawn hurriedly got up and pulled Jane up. "Come, I'll take you to the infirmary." Fever was no trivial matter. Initially, Jane did not want to go, but Dawn insisted on them going, so Jane could only follow since she really did not have the strength to stop her. It was not an easy task for Dawn to support all of Jane's weight all the way to the infirmary. "Why are you only here now, after sporting such high fever?" The doctor stretched out his hand, felt Jane's forehead, and said, "Send her in first, and you, go and register your names." "Okay." Dawn helped Jane into the doctor's office and handed her over to a nurse while she responded to the doctor. Jane had to be put on drips. Because Jane was sporting a high fever and since Dawn sent her in, she was acted against it. "I'm sorry for taking up your time," Jane said weakly. "You can go back to class now, I'm alright by myself." "It's okay. I'm often absent from class anyway." 1 or 2 classes skipped isn't gonna make much of a difference. Dawn smiled at her to reassure her. Even Jane, a girl, was unable to move her gaze away when she saw Dawn's kind and brilliant smile. She said to Dawn abruptly, "Actually, I think the rumors about you from those classmates are groundless and false. At least, you're the one that sent me here today, and you are even willing to accompany me here." "Huh, those don't matter," Dawn said lightly. "I'm not here to make friends anyway, I just want to go to school quietly." "That's true, so what if you're not liked by others?" She didn't come to socialize anyway. Life is so short. Why should she care about those who can't see eye to eye with her? This life feels too short to even spend enough time together with the person you love. At this moment, Dawn had received a text from Jian, which only consisted of 2 words, "Miss you." Looking at those 2 words, Jian's exquisite and handsome face instantly floated in her mind, and Dawn could not help but smile warmly and sweetly. "Your boyfriend must love you a lot." Jane guessed from the happy and sweet look on Dawn's face that she was probably chatting with her boyfriend. The smile on her face is really enviable. Huh? Dawn snapped back to her senses, raised her hand slightly embarrassedly, and tucked the hair from her forehead behind her ears shyly and happily as she murmured, "Well, he's alright. I envy you." Jane sighed and tried to make conversation as she asked, "Is he also from our school, or is he already working?" "He's not from our school." Dawn paused and said, "He's just an ordinary person who goes to work." "Okay, enough about me." Dawn changed the subject. "Why are you wearing so little on such a cold day? Also, why didn't you just go to the doctor knowing that you are sick?" As soon as Dawn had finished speaking, Jane's tears that had just stopped flowed down once again as sadness filled her face. "My mother didn't even allow me to pay me for the tuition fees. I earned it all by doing part-time jobs. The cost of living in Metropolis is so high. Although the school does provide me with some assistance, it is still very difficult for me. My mother demanded that I go home at the end of this month and go to the factory to work so I can help support my younger brother to study, but I also want to go to school as well. I have worked hard for so many years and managed to be admitted into the school of my dreams. Once my mother demanded that I drop out, I would have to, or she won't give me another penny and she'd leave me in Metropolis to fend for myself." Jane muttered sorrowfully. "Since I was little, my mother didn't like me. She never wanted me to go to school, and she'd always yell at me. If I hadn't persisted all the way, I wouldn't be where I am now. I would have dropped out of school a long time ago. I will never drop out of school. I don't care if I have to take a few more jobs to support myself, and I should be able to get by if I work hard to get a school scholarship." After Dawn listened to her, she was reminded of herself when she was a child. She too was not treated kindly by Xiaoban Neve, her so-called mother, and she would also often get yelled at. When she was a child, she had always wanted to go to school, but Xiaoban would confiscate her identification papers to prevent her from signing up. And there were also many schools that did not want to accept her. Fortunately, along the way, Dawn had met many people who were willing to help her. She got to know 2 brothers and 1 sister, and she felt that the heavens were giving her a break. So when she saw Jane, Dawn was reminded of her past self where she was isolated and helpless. If someone were to extend a helping hand towards her at this time, they would become a beam of light in her heart that would illuminate her entire life. Chapter 48, You Vulgar Rascal. "Okay, you know what? I can cover your tuition fees for the next 4 years until you graduate. As for living expenses, you'll have to take care of it yourself." Dawn said to her, "The money is a loan to you, so you will have to pay it back in the future. I believe that a good student of good character like you will definitely make a difference in the future. So, when you make a lot of money, remember to pay me back." "Are you serious?" Jane Smith suddenly seemed like she had grabbed a lifeline, and said emotionally, I can write you an IOU, and I will definitely return the money to you in the future." Yes, the IOU must also be written. Dawn knew that this would make Jane accept the money with peace of mind, so she smiled at her. "You can go to school with peace of mind." Dawn looked at her with a twinkle in her eyes, thinking back to the time when she met her two brothers for the first time when she was a child. She was also shocked and afraid of bursting into tears. She was clearly just a stranger, but she had got the best care from her two brothers, and she was in a good place. Although she did not want to be nosy, she would help if she could. Just like all the unknown benefactors that had helped her back then. It might be just a small effort on their side, but it was life-saving for the recipients. She would just consider it a kind act that someone else could pay forward next time. Anyway, she had saved up some money the past few years, so she did not need to use Gion's money for this. When your drips are done, if you're okay, let's go back to the dormitory so I can get you a padded jacket to wear. I have brand new ones that I haven't had the chance to wear. It's too cold now, and you are wearing too little. In the beginning, Dawn wanted to live in the school, so the school gave her a room, but Gion insisted that she stayed at home, and the room was never returned, and they had to stay in their dormitories during their lunch break. So Gion prepared a lot of food and clothing for her in the dormitory. I don't mind at all, thank you so much. Jane cried emotionally once again. I really don't know what to say. Thank you very much. Don't worry, I will study hard and return to you twice the amount of money in the future. The two little girls shared a smile, one innocent and beautiful, the other crying while she was laughing. Before they knew it, Jane was done with the 4 drip, so they went back to Dawn's dormitory and she picked out a jacket for Jane. It was probably fate, since they were both about the same height and roughly the same size, except that Dawn's figure was slightly curvier. Since winter was the season for padded jackets, both of them look extremely similar from behind. This was the first time Dawn has given such great help to a stranger, and there was a feeling of passing down a legacy. She had grown up as the recipient of others' help, and now she could pass on the favor to those in need. Dawn was in a very good mood the entire day. At night, while Dawn was lying in Gion's arms and playing with his slender fingers, she suddenly asked him, "Does your company recruit college students to work part-time? It'll be ideal if the workload is light and easy and the pay is good." Gion frowned, lowered his head, and looked at her very seriously. "Why are you worried about making money? You should worry about how to spend money." Dawn wanted to explain that she was asking on behalf of her classmates, but when she met Gion's serious eyes, she gave up. Forget it, why interrupt their alone time for others? After all, their friendship was not that deep, and last time, her two brothers told her that the help of others is merely temporary. You must work hard so you yourself can shine. So Jane, the rest is up to you now. Dawn smiled sweetly at Gion, looked at him, and joked. Really? How much money do you have, President? I'd really have to figure out how to spend it all. How much money I have depends on how much my wife needs. Gion replied very seriously. Everything I have is because of you. I will work hard to give you whatever you want, even if it's the moon in the skies or the stars above the ocean. I would do anything for you. Because you are worthy of the best things in the world. If that's the case, I have a humongous need. Dawn crawled on Gion and laid half her body on him, her bright little face right in front of his eyes, and she said with a cheerful smile, "Mr. Mose, you've got to think long and hard about how you can make more money, then." Her smile was sweet and lovable, her ruby-red lips opened and closed, making Gion's mouth very dry all of a sudden. He narrowed his eyes, his voice was vaguely hoarse as he exclaimed, "I don't want to worry about that right now." Dawn did not realize that all that danger was approaching her. She merely continued his sentence in feigned displeasure. "If you're not thinking about that, what am I gonna spend it on? And you just said it'll depend on my needs, liar. Hey, what are you doing?" As soon as she finished speaking, Gion suddenly turned her over and tucked her under him, startling her so much she suddenly pursed her lips tightly, blinked her marble-like eyes, and her heart started pounding faster as she watched him slowly lowered his head to her ear. She felt a cloud of warm breath enveloping her as he whispered, "I won't worry about me, I'd start worrying about you. Gion, you rascal. You shameless, vulgar rascal. I want to report you to the authorities, you two-faced man, you put on a stern, unfriendly outlook with everyone else on a daily basis, but you're actually so morally corrupted in private. Dawn no longer cared what she was accusing her man of. This man was too much. He could not even hold a proper conversation without thinking about that. Holding back a smile, Jian grabbed her little defiant hand, clasped them, and lifted them to the top of her head. Then he said coyly, "Who are you intending to report me to, my madam? I don't think anyone would believe you. After all, it was your words that called me stern and unapproachable when I'm outside, and how unfriendly I am." Dawn froze for a moment. Yes, this man was too skilled at pretending, and he was extremely different in private from the public image he portrayed. She remembered watching one of the rare interviews that Jian took part in, and all he said the entire interview was, yes, correct." The extremely limited choice of words made the battle-hardened host surrender and gave up, reducing a half-hour interview into a short 10-minute one, and from then on, no one wanted to interview Jian ever again, and Jian too was not a fan of interviews like these. So, even if she told others about this side of him, outsiders would only think that she had lost her mind. When Dawn was lost in her thoughts, Jian sealed her lips with his, domineering and strong, irrefutable, and they dived deep together. "Don't." Dawn resisted vigorously. "Jian, I have to go to school tomorrow, you will make me late again." "No, I won't." Jian smiled sinisterly. "You don't have morning classes, you only need to be in school in the afternoon, so we can all sleep in." "Even so, Dawn never stood a chance, and she did not have a chance to cry out for mercy since all she could do was follow his lead with all her heart as they dove into the seas of desire, from resisting him to giving him full cooperation. Jian swore that he intended for her to rest today, but when she was lying on him with that alluring smile, it lured him in and it was fatal. When Dawn finally woke up again, it was already noon the next day. In a daze, she turned around, and her body was still a little sore. As she stretched out her ivory-colored arms to the bedside and fumbled for her phone, Dawn rubbed her eyes and sat up. There was a post-it note on her phone. "There's chicken soup in the thermos jug on the table beside the bed. Remember to drink it. The kitchen had also prepared all your favorite food today. It's a cold day today, so remember to put on all the clothes by the bed. There are biscuits and milk in your school bag, as well as extra warm packs." Chapter 49. Stone-faced president smiling sweetly in the meeting room. Dawn looked at how Jian signed off as "love, your husband," and instantly her drowsiness disappeared. She smiled like a fool at the post-it note, and a burst of warmth spontaneously bloomed in her heart. Even so, she still pretended to be angry as she sent Jian a text saying, "Don't you think you can buy me off with little tidbits like this? I will definitely find an opportunity to expose you, you vulgar hooligan." Jian, who was in a meeting at work, smiled uncontrollably as the corner of his mouth itched to turn upwards when he saw the message from Dawn. Although the smile only happened in a flash, everyone present at the meeting noticed it. Everyone glanced at each other in disbelief and silently communicated. "Did President Mose just smile just now? I saw it too. That smile is so weird. It's actually loving." "No, everyone, you've read it wrong. President Mose would never be caught smiling, and his face would be as stern like someone had owed him $80 million. No, President Mose just smiled. Although it was only a flash, I believe in my eyes." Even the manager who was explaining about the new project suddenly paused in disbelief. It was not until Jian raised his head again in his usual aloofness that caused everyone to jolt back to their senses so they could continue the meeting. After Dawn sent the message, she got out of bed and went to wash up, only to notice that Jian had already put a lavender-scented warm pack on her lower abdomen. This was recommended by Tom Jinli. Unlike ordinary warm packs, this warm pack could calm the nerves and reduce stress. After eating and packing everything up, Dawn was on her way downstairs to go to school, when she saw Jean watching the news and eating fruit on the sofa in the living room. He looked so carefree. "Are you that free today?" Dawn took her school bag, walked down the stairs, and said hi to Jean. "Are you gonna go to school, little Donnie. Jean looked over and joked lazily at Dawn. I so happen to have something to do at your school, so why not I send you there? Actually, he was deliberately teasing her, because Dawn used to say that he looked too fierce, so she refused to let him send her to school. And he remembered it up till today. Okay, it'll just save me the trouble of finding someone else then. Dawn agreed immediately. Maybe after getting along with each other for a period of time, Jean did not seem as fierce as he did anymore. Besides, she was joking at that time. Jean put down the apple in his hand in disbelief and cocked his eyebrows to look at Dawn. Are you for real? You didn't even want Sir Mose to send you in. Why did you suddenly agree for me to send you to school today? Did you suddenly discover my handsome looks that could cause everyone to fall in love with me? Dawn hardly listened to the latter part of his sentence. The first part of the sentence kept looping in her mind. You didn't even want Sir Mose to send you in. She was suddenly reminded of the time when he sent her right to the doorstep of her school but was rejected immediately when he wanted to walk her in. In retrospect, he did not even unbuckle his seat belt that day. His usual habit was that, once the car had stopped, he would unbuckle his seatbelt, get out of the car so he could open the door for her. He probably knew that he would be rejected, so he did not hold out much hope. The loneliness in his eyes that day still seared in her mind, since he even seemed a little sheepish. Dawn did not speak all the way to school. She kept thinking about Jeon and the moments they spent together. He was like the perfect and impeccable man who had suddenly parachuted out of nowhere till he was by her side, who took care of her and pampered her greatly. Apart from forcing her to stay by his side, he did not ask her for anything else in return. Even so, she refused to recognize him in public. Dawn, what were you thinking? Who else would you need to impress? The Tymes? Right now, no one knew who you were to the Tymes, and you knew Jeon was not as cruel as the rumors said that he was. You knew perfectly well how kindly he treats you. You must be so devastated. Dawn muttered to herself as she lay on the table. Dawn, are you okay? Jane Smith, who sat next to her, had just come back from the counselor's office and saw Dawn lying on the table with sadness on her face. I'm fine. Dawn hurriedly collected her thoughts and asked Jane. Did the counselor need anything from you? Didn't you already pay your tuition fees in full? Dawn had paid Jane's tuition fees in full yesterday. It's nothing, it's just that the school knows about my situation, and you know how Mr. Enzo's the invited guest lecturer in our school. He told me that he wanted to fund my college tuition fees and in return, he hopes that I'd study with Sheena more often and hoped that we would eventually become friends. However, I rejected his offer. Jane sighed and continued. At that time, I said, Mr. Tyme, thank you for your kindness, but the tuition fee problem that I had has been solved. Even though I am in a very difficult situation right now, but I'd still like to retain a little dignity. If I accept your sponsorship, then Sheena would definitely announce it to the world, and the image she would paint would color me into becoming her sidekick. I don't want things to turn out like this, but I am still very grateful for your kindness, Mr. Tyme. Poofed. Right, sorry. Dawn, who was drinking water when Jane was telling her about what had happened, nearly choked on her water when she heard how things unfolded. She looked at Jane in shock and asked, why did you have to say all those things about Sheena in front of Mr. Tyme? If you just want to thank me by offending Sheena just because I've helped you, it's completely unnecessary. Don't think too much. I didn't like Sheena in the first place either. She's too self-righteous and she does not have a good heart. Jane began to complain. Remember what happened the last time? I didn't care what seats I was given, but in order to throw you under the bus, she went to the teacher's office, used my name, and told the teacher on my behalf that I was not satisfied with my seat and wanted a rearrangement done. The counselor had actually called me into her office for questioning. With her character, if I really accept her family's funding, I don't know what stories would she weave off of me. She was not wrong. For Sheena to be able to do those things, and since she was the #1 rumormonger, it would be bragging rights for Sheena that the best student of her year would still need to suck up to her in order to lead a peaceful life. That was indeed a very suffocating thought. Mr. Time is so kind. Sometimes I do wonder, I don't know how he ended up having a daughter like that. Jane Smith continued. When we walked out of the office, Mr. Time even chased after me and whispered that he could secretly fund my studies in private without letting others know, so I just said, "Thank you so much, but my problem has been solved." Dawn, who is my deskmate, offered to help me, and I hope you can help me keep this a secret. The only reason Jane revealed what Dawn had done for her was just so Enzo did not pester her anymore. Dawn was taken aback when she heard it. At this moment, she wanted to know how her father felt when he heard that she has been helping her classmates. Would he have a better impression of her? At that time, did Mr. Time say anything? Dawn asked carefully. I'm not sure why, but when he heard your name, Mr. Time was taken aback for a moment, and then he smiled and said, Dawn is a good kid, she's a good kid. Jane Smith replied, and suddenly she thought of something as her eyes widened. Hey, both of you share the same last name. Are you guys related? We're not. Dawn replied hastily as she tried to conceal it. There are too many people with the same last name. Probably because we share the same last name, that's why Mr. Time would naturally pay more attention to me. Since the Time family has never made her existence public, naturally, she would not add unwanted attention towards the Times in this matter.